Full of coffee and excited to get into our conversation. I'm Sue Gander with the Electrification Coalition. I'm truly thrilled to welcome you all to our North Carolina Electric Vehicle Policy Bootcamp. So this meeting's part of a 5-state policy accelerator, but we've designed this bootcamp specifically for North Carolina with the help of many of the folks from North Carolina that are on this call today. As we start, I do want to recognize that we're going through some challenging times right now. Not only are we doing this meeting virtually instead of as we'd planned in person, we're struggling with an assortment of other challenges and new situations. And I just want to recognize that the pandemic has had a big impact on our economy, on the auto industry broadly, and the electric vehicle industry specifically. However, I do also want to note that it's kind of heartening that while we've seen some delays in some of the plans for EV rollouts and the release of new EV models, we've also seen a continued commitment from the automakers to move forward with electrification and a continued demand from buyers. So we'll be taking all these considerations in mind as we seek to explore how to accelerate EV adoption for North Carolina. So over the next few hours, we're going to be hearing more about how we can all work together to accelerate North Carolina's electrified transportation future. We're calling this a boot camp, but please do not worry about that term. We do have an admiral joining us today, but there's no push-ups or burpees in this boot camp. What we hope to do is exercise your brains and get you in good shape for a lot of hard policy work in the coming year. I encourage you also to stand up, move around as needed, keep that blood flowing during the webinar. We all know what it's like to be stuck at our desk for 10 hours a day listening to Zoom. So feel free to jump up and down, do whatever you need to do. Just gonna go over a few housekeeping things to get us all kind of oriented. First off, we've got a lot of great people on this webinar today, and we're thrilled for all of you to join us. But unfortunately, that means we can't go around and introduce each one of you. So what we've asked you to do is please go ahead, sign in to the chat box on Zoom. Just put your first and last name and your organization so everyone can know who's here and we can all get excited about the great community that's coming together to talk about EVs. We're also using what we call Chatham House rules, also known as Vegas rules. And what we mean there is that we want to create an environment for all participants to be able to share freely and engage in dialogue. So we ask that as you're going through the day, please refrain from screenshotting anything in this in the day, and please do not attribute anything specifically to do not attribute anything in any kind of quote specifically to any folks. We are going to be doing some social media, and we encourage you to help us with that as well. But just be mindful of the environment here that we're trying to create. We are recording portions of the video, and we will post that later to share. So you will get a copy of that along with the slides that we'll post on our website. I'll note that we've got a great lineup of speakers, and all of their bios are linked both in the agenda that you should have received, and we'll also post the link to those before each session in the chat box. The chat box is your friend. I'm going to say it another time. Please use the chat box for any questions for speakers. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And we'll also have a great session at the end of the day, our fishbowl, which is a great chance to share your ideas in a live form. So if you have thoughts that come up and you want to get into the queue for the chat box, please chat privately to EC Tech. And you'll see there are handles for Twitter, and again, encourage you to help us amplify the great discussions that are coming on today. With that, thrilled to just give you a preview of today's speakers and panelists, top-notch and broad array of folks that are coming to you today to share with you all their thoughts around EV acceleration. You're going to be hearing from leaders across government, the private sector, the military, and nonprofit sectors. The program is designed to help all of us learn about why EVs are a fantastic technology, where the technology is heading, and what North Carolina is already doing to move forward in this area. Before we get going, we do want to get to know you just a little bit better. We've had this poll up on the screen and have a couple of questions just to get a sense of your familiarity with electric vehicles, your interest in electric vehicles, and just a chance to get engaged a little bit more. So hopefully you've had a chance to answer the poll. We're gonna just take a quick peek at the answers just to kind of level set on who's in our crowd, find out how long you've been part of efforts to advance electric vehicles in North Carolina, and whether you yourself have planned or plan to purchase an electric vehicle. So with that, our results are here right now. So you can see that it's a good breadth, actually, kind of split pretty evenly in that first question. You know, EVs are new to the scene, so it's reasonable that, you know, many folks haven't been working on this topic for so long, but this is great to see that variety there. And on the second question, as you're seeing it there as well, I don't know if we got all the answers showing up on the screen there, but it looks like strong lead for being motivated by cleaner air and protecting the environment, with a second place, I guess, going to saving money. And of course, all of those things there are great attributes of electric vehicles, as you'll hear from many of the folks today. So thanks for doing our poll. We're going to have a few more of those throughout the course of the day and try to keep things interactive and lively as we go. So a little bit about who we are at the Electrification Coalition. We're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We are dedicated solely to the effort of accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles on a mass scale across the United States. So that means that day in and day out, every day, our mission is to work on EVs. Our motivation comes from the need to reduce our oil dependence and the related energy and national security risks that this dependency carries. And I think you'll hear best on that topic from Admiral Blair, who'll be joining us later today. He's a member of our Energy Security Leadership Council, and we're excited to have his leadership along with many other former military officials in telling that story to all of you. So our team of more than 24 is located across the country, but part of the team is focused specifically on working with North Carolina. So that includes myself, as well as the folks you see here up on this screen. I really like this photo. It's one of a Pygora goat farm outside of Asheville, where my husband's aunt relocated after living for many years in Long Island. So she's one of those folks that's come to your state and really fell in love with it. And really, I try to get out there as often as I can. So just a little backdrop there. Along with myself, we've got Ben Prochaska, who's our national director. He is based in North Carolina. He'll be leading part of the fireside chat later today and some of the sessions. Also, Will Dreyer, Brad Nelson, and Jared Walker, who works with the local communities within North Carolina. So a great team. In addition to a number of other folks who you'll be hearing from throughout the course of the day. You may already know that the transportation sector is 92% dependent on oil. But by moving to electric vehicles, we can lower that dependency and also bring about a host of other energy, national security, and other benefits. One of those benefits that we've highlighted here is the opportunity to lower greenhouse gas emissions. What this chart shows is that transportation is now the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions for the state of North Carolina. Through great efforts that have been happening across the state for many years, the electric power sector has been getting cleaner and cleaner, which is a great thing. But that just means that we need to start to work more on the transportation sector as well. So how do we do this? How do we achieve this pretty massive goal in electrifying transportation? We do it one vehicle, one fleet, one city, and one state at a time. So we're excited to be working in North Carolina to do just that. Electrification Coalition's work to date has spanned the local, state, and federal level. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of what that is and some of the ways that we're going to be bringing some of those ideas and lessons learned forward through projects like the Climate Mayors Purchasing Collaborative that works with mayors, over 200 mayors across the country, to help lower the cost of bringing vehicles and infrastructure into their fleets. We've also have a new freight electrification pilot that we're launching that's going to be really helpful in terms of informing efforts on in that important sector. And what we've realized over the last decade or so working on that is that there is a way to get to a transportation future, lots of policies and programs that can help us get there. And these are the kinds of things that we're excited about bringing to North Carolina and working with all of you on. So this year we launched a new program. It's the State EV Policy Accelerator Program, and it recognizes that it's really at the state level where a lot of really important policy levers exist. So this is an opportunity to add on to the work we were already doing. We've selected 5 states where we're working intently on helping move forward on a transportation, electrified transportation future. So in addition to North Carolina, we're also working with Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, and it's a great opportunity to learn from each of those states and their efforts as well. This policy bootcamp is a piece of our program there. As you see, in addition to this bootcamp and other similar bootcamps, we're developing a policy blueprint that we'll speak to later, a policy toolkit that's full of resources to use, and also focus on EV policy deployment efforts as well. What we saw in North Carolina, and the reason we're so excited about working in North Carolina, was a great combination of both momentum and opportunity. So great things going, great leadership at both the state and local levels, engagement by utilities and the private sector, and a very supportive advocacy community, and great leadership at some of your academic institutions. So we're really excited about the opportunities within North Carolina. Our project is focused initially on a 2-year effort, and we hope to make a lot of progress on the groundwork that's already been laid through things like Executive Order 80 and the ZEV plans that have been put together, and the work that many of you are engaged with on a daily basis. Just want to flip through really quickly a few slides that point to what's already going on in North Carolina. Happy to bring to you these next few slides through a group we work closely with called Atlas Public Policy. They're a DC-based policy tech firm. They started about 5 years ago, and they're really a go-to source of great data, great information. We have many, 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 many more slides like this that we'll be sharing with you in our follow-up and posting on our website. So if you don't get a chance to look at this in detail, we'll have more to come. I think what the picture is here around EV sales, charging employment, investment, funding, you'll hear more about this in detail. It's a great foundation, but it's also pointing to the need to go further and go faster to be able to meet the goals for North Carolina. Fortunately, we have a great starting point here with lots of policies already put in place, with spending starting to roll out. And these are the kind of things that we want to build upon and talk to all of you about in the coming years. And why do we want to do this? There's an array of benefits, as I noted earlier, to bringing electrification to North Carolina. Everything from reducing dependency on oil that accounts for over $12 billion in money in spending in the state, to expanding jobs and the opportunities to create new jobs in this area, improving health, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and also taking the opportunity to develop policies that will help bring electrification to marginalized communities and communities of color that might not otherwise be benefiting from electrification. So as we launch into the program, let's buckle up, enjoy the ride. We hope you will truly drive away with more passion for EVs, with ideas for some new partners, and hopefully at least 1 or 2 new policy ideas that you will be seeking to pursue. This is just a quick slide with our contact information. If you want to continue to be in touch with us, welcome your follow-up online, and feel free to directly contact me as well. So with that, I am truly thrilled to introduce our first speaker. It's Roy Cooper, who is the governor, as you know, of the great state of North Carolina. Governor Cooper is a champion of electric vehicles. Really excited to have him at the helm, and his passion for the economic and environmental opportunities that come from EVs are really, truly inspiring. As you know, he set an executive order with a goal of bringing 80,000 electric vehicles to the state by 2025. That was truly a groundbreaking move and something that's been a source of inspiration for many other states. So now through the magic of video technology, Governor Cooper is going to offer us all a very hearty welcome and provide us with some encouraging words as we start our journey today. So with that, let's go to Governor Cooper.
Hi, everybody. Governor Roy Cooper here. The transportation sector is changing rapidly to become more automated, connected, and electric. As we transition to clean power, our electric vehicles must be cleaner, reliable, and affordable. My administration has taken proactive steps to ensure North Carolina is on the leading edge of transportation electrification. In 2018, I signed Executive Order 80 to transition us to clean energy. That order sets goals for our state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% and add 80,000 zero-emission vehicles to our roadways by 2025. Our VW settlement funds are fueling electrification of our transit, like school buses, and adding chargers to make it easier to use an electric vehicle in our state. The effects of climate change don't impact communities equally. That's why the Andrea Harris Task Force has dedicated a subcommittee to environmental justice that focuses on further lessening the burdens of pollution in historically underserved communities. We're headed in the right direction to make sure our communities, businesses, and environment benefit from transportation electrification. But we need your help and expertise to continue this momentum. I look forward to continuing to take on the threat of climate change and work with you to build a North Carolina where people are healthier, better educated, and have more money in their pockets. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Governor Cooper. We really appreciate hearing of your vision and your charge to all of us to keep moving forward. We'd like to now turn to some of those folks that are actually working on the ground to help implement that vision. So I'm thrilled now to turn over the screen, if you will, to Jeremy Tarr. He's the Senior Advisor to Governor Cooper. He's going to lead our State of the State address and introduce the next couple of speakers who are some of the key folks working at the state level to help bring this vision of transportation electrification to North Carolina. Take it away, Jeremy.
Great. Thank you, Sue. Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. Before introducing Sushma Macemore and Kevin Lacey, I just want to take a minute to elaborate on Governor Cooper's comments and frame some of the topics that are going to be the focus for this panel. As you've heard already, under Governor's leadership, we've taken a number of new actions to advance transportation electrification. One is Executive Order 80, which again set North Carolina's first carbon reduction goals and zero emission vehicle goals. We have VW settlement funds, 92 million, and many of those are many grants to distribute those funds are gonna be used to advance electrification in a wide variety of vehicles. DOT, in partnership with other cabinet agencies, developed North Carolina's first ever zero emission vehicle plan. Governor Cooper this summer signed the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU, joining a dozen or so other governors and signing that MOU. North Carolina's Clean Energy Plan has a section with EV specific recommendations, and those are recommendations that are sort of congruent and interface well with the North Carolina ZEV plan. So these are topics that Sushma and Kevin are going to talk more about in the subsequent conversation. Before turning to them, though, I did want to mention a few more actions that don't get as much attention but are meaningful. The first is that Executive Order 80 directed all cabinet agencies to use a zero emission vehicle whenever feasible. And last year, our Department of Administration released the North Carolina Motor Fleet ZEV plan, which defines feasibility and includes action steps that we're working through to increase ZEVs in the state fleet. Second, because of the economic opportunity that vehicle electrification offers North Carolina, and the unique North Carolina advantages that we offer EV-related businesses and supply chain companies, our Department of Commerce conducted a clean transportation workforce assessment last year per EO80. And the Department of Commerce is supporting DEQ and DOT with participation in the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU task force. So really appreciate the work that many of you on the line here have played, and actions that you're taking to work with us to help advance vehicle electrification in North Carolina. Before introducing Sushma, I wanted to ask you to go ahead and enter your questions through the chat function during the presentations. We'll have a few minutes at the end to address them, but please go ahead and enter them along the way. Sushma Macemore is our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Environment and the State Energy Director at North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. She's the DEQ point person for climate change and energy initiatives, including having successfully led extensive processes in the past couple of years among state agencies and stakeholders, including many of you, to develop the North Carolina Clean Energy Plan and the North Carolina Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan. Sushma, thanks for joining the panel, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, Sue and the team for inviting us to speak. I hope you can hear me okay. All right, I'm going to share my slides, confirm that you can see them. Everybody good?
Yeah, we see you, Sushma. You have you're in presentation mode, so if you could switch it maybe to full screen, we'll see that and not your notes.
It is in full screen. Let's see. How's that?
That's fine. Well,
Okay. I'm in the presentation mode. Is that okay?
we're seeing the 3 cells, so if you're able to just switch to the simple mode, and then, yeah, I think we're good with that. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. All right, so I'll get started. My topics will cover broadly the Clean Energy Plan recommendations in the Clean Energy Plan that was mentioned under Executive Order 80. I'll briefly go over where we are as a department on the Volkswagen Settlement Phase 1 Award. And then I'll highlight what the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle MOU has been about and where we are in that planning stage. The Clean Energy Plan was a directive under EO 80 to the department to generate a vision of the energy future for North Carolina. We started the process in January 2019 and finished in late September of 2019. And this is the result of that product. What you see is a summary report and a series of supporting documents. The main thing the Clean Energy Plan set was a long-term vision of where we would like our carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions to be. And that is 70% reductions in the electricity sector and achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. It also recognized that in order to get there, transformational changes need to happen in the regulatory space, in business space, and economic development space, as well as providing access and addressing energy burden and energy equity issues. So these goals that were set were designed to set the groundwork for where work needed to occur in achieving the vision. One of the things Clean Energy Plan recognized was the declining cost of a variety of technologies. And as you hear today, one of those technologies is the battery storage systems. These battery technologies over the last 10 years or so has declined, prices have declined precipitously. And that has affected not only their availability and their market competition in the vehicle space, but also for the battery storage in the power sector space. This is a chart that I saw from Atlas Public Policy a few weeks back that recognizes that we've had at least 85% decline in the battery storage prices, and that we are probably at an inflection point where the way solar energy was declining, and it brought to large penetration in the market, that the same thing will happen in the battery technologies. So the US is not alone in this. All the countries in the world are jockeying for this market opportunity. What you see on the right here are the countries that have invested cumulatively over $400 billion in private investment. And as you see, China and Germany and Europe are going to be currently the leading countries investing in these technologies. And the US is expected to share about 15% of the total investments. What we do today and tomorrow puts our country in the next phase of transportation advancement. Our department and Division of Air Quality and the State Energy Office participated in an analysis a couple of years ago for the Energy Policy Council. And we basically looked at what the growth of EVs are expected to be in North Carolina. And this was slightly before the EO80, and then we completed the work after EO80. And as you see here on the right are a variety of projections for how many electric vehicles are anticipated to be in North Carolina. And they vary from 40,000 vehicles in 2025 to as much as 82,000 vehicles, depending on where you look at the Bloomberg forecast at. Regardless, we see an increasing growth in EVs between now and 2040. And it could share the number of total light-duty vehicles on our roads from 3% to as much as 16%. And as you all go into this boot camp and we talk about this, this is where the growth levels are expected to be. Another thing we recognize, as Sue said, is greenhouse gas emissions are a priority for many states, many companies, local governments, and the transportation sector now as a whole. Our inventory shows that the electricity sector right now is the #1 emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, followed closely by transportation. We see this parity changing around 2022, 2023, especially in light of the latest APA rollback on the CAFE standards. So when you look at the transportation sector being a contributor to greenhouse gases, and then no current federal policies contributing to those reductions, we really need to look at locally and at the state level. And recognizing that transportation has been historically linked to air pollution emissions and also greenhouse gases, there are dual benefits to electrification. And that is, as we change to a cleaner, more centralized and more distributed energy system, that the balance of fuel switches from cars to power sector results in reductions in emissions. We estimated that in the Charlotte ozone maintenance area, that based on the projections I showed earlier, that by 2025, we could see CO2 reductions as much as 4% and NOx reductions of about less than 1%. This is related to a petroleum displacement of about 4.5%. And this is not small in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. The offsetting is significant. If you extrapolate those emissions to state level, we're looking at 1.7 million metric tons of CO2. And that is equivalent to as much as 5% of the total emissions from the power sector. So all I'm trying to say here is the numbers are significant and they add up to the levels that we're trying to reduce. The CEP also laid out a variety of recommendations where policies and actual on-the-ground projects can be implemented. And in the EV space, I just want to lay out here that we are working in a variety of action areas where EVs and transportation electrifications are affected. There was a specific recommendation category for electrification of the transportation sector, which is on the right here that I'll focus a little bit more. But there's other work going on related to the business model as well as regulatory reform associated with electrification. And here are just 3 of those recommendations. One was related to designing the rate process itself, how we value electrification and how the customer is incentivized to charge their vehicles certain times of the day to benefit the customer as well as the power grid. And so that recommendation is in an L1. If you're interested, there's a lot of good information there. And the second was more at the user end. How do you provide access and infrastructure for the customers to benefit from electrification? And so here we are looking at ways to offer programs that benefits all communities as well as assist local governments in meeting their targets. Going back to what the utility programs are doing, many states are recognizing that electrification is going to change the way power system is supporting the transportation sector. The utilities see this as a way to increase their load, but there's also opportunities at the same time to design that structure so it benefits the people, the ratepayers, and the communities. So what you see here at a high level are many states looking at regulatory processes and the utility system as a whole. And as you can see, many filings have been introduced in their commissions worth billions of dollars in investments. I'll transition to where we are on the VW settlement. Our Division Air Quality team is leading this effort. They have worked so hard to distribute, actually issue the RFPs and evaluate the applications. And they're in the process of distributing the funds according to this summary chart. What you see here are the various programs through which the VW Phase 1 funding will be divvied out. The school bus, the transit buses, off-road equipment, on-road equipment, and the ZEV infrastructure comprise of these programs. And the amount of dollars that you see here are not only the percentages, but the total values that are being allocated towards the Phase 1 distribution. For the ZEV infrastructure, there will be 33 DC fast charge stations that will be deployed under this program. And I've also highlighted a few electrification related projects that are being funded under the school bus program category and the transit bus category. We have some team members from DAQ that are involved in this program that would be happy to answer any questions if anyone has them. And then here is their map of where the priority corridors were for the Phase 1 selection of the DC fast charge projects. You see here existing infrastructure and additional fast charges that would be deployed as a result of the VW settlement. And our state energy office has taken some of those applications and are funding charging station deployments. One of them is in Grandfather Mountain that they've specifically requested a charging station be installed, and that's under works currently. I'm going to transition quickly to the medium heavy duty zero emission vehicle MOU. This is a multi-state agreement understanding between governors to build on the success of what Northeast had done related to medium and heavy duty, related to light duty vehicles, but applying that for larger, heavier vehicles. It commits the signatories to work together as a coalition to create a market for these types of vehicles. Together, they are calling for a 30% of all new and trucks and buses to be zero emission vehicles by 2030, and to have all of those new sales by 2050. The program just got started, and the team is currently discussing what their work plan will consist of. The action plan is designated to be developed in about 1.5 years to 2 years. I had very limited time, so I hope I stayed with it, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thanks.
Thanks, Sushma. Next, I'll introduce Kevin Lacey. Kevin's the state traffic engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation. He directs DOT's Transportation, Mobility, and Safety Division, which encompasses 6 units. And this division is charged with providing safe and efficient movement of all modes of transportation through research, design, and implementation of innovative traffic safety and operation strategies. Kevin, thanks for joining us. I'll turn it over to you. We see your slides. Looks good.
Thank you, Jeremy. I lost my unmute button, but I guess getting up in front of a crowd is a little bit easier than sitting in front of a computer and presenting. But thank you, Jeremy, for that. I'm going to start.
Kevin, just want to let you know your video's off too. I don't know if that's intentional, but FYI.
Let me turn that on. There, I've got the COVID beard going from the picture. A lot of folks have mentioned the governor's executive order 80 already. It was a monumental step, and I want to make a few other mentions about it, because like in North Carolina, like other states, many people want to argue the climate change issue, but I want to point out some things that this executive order really touched on that can't be argued. For instance, in the last 20 years, North Carolina has experienced 3 500-year storms that has caused billions of dollars of damage and created long-term displacement and suffering for our citizens. People may remember Floyd in '99, Matthew in 2016, and Florence not too long ago in 2018. What is also unquestioned is the natural beauty that our state enjoys, from the Great Smoky Mountains through the rolling hills of the Piedmont, coastal plains, and the sand hills, and over 300 miles of sandy beaches. And on top of our natural beauty, we also have a thriving agricultural industry throughout the state. And there is no disagreement that these natural treasures are worth preserving and are part of our way of life in North Carolina. Quick summary on how we got here. To help combat these increasing large-scale and dangerous weather events brought on by climate change, Governor Cooper announced Executive Order 80 to reduce statewide gas emissions, reduce energy consumption, and increase the number of zero-emission vehicles. Increasing the number of zero-emission vehicles will improve the air quality that people breathe, allow greater mobility, grow the clean energy economy. The ZEV plan focuses on ways the state can encourage growth and expansion of zero-emission vehicles, including adding more charging stations so it's easier and more convenient to own a vehicle. The future of transportation is going to be connected, electric, and autonomous. As the governor mentioned, it's also going to change very fast, faster than we've seen in the past. And this plan will allow us to adjust to these changes. The plan focuses on 3 major key areas: establishing interstate and intrastate zero-emission vehicle corridors. To do this, we've been working with Georgetown University to gather statewide data and locate where charging stations would have the most impact. We've also conducted local meetings and polls to gauge interest for communities that would like to see more charging stations. Second item is increased installation of ZEV infrastructure, such as charging stations. As this technology is new, it also requires us to look at legislation and protocols that need to be reevaluated, as some of these older languages may stifle ZEV implementation. One victory that we recently had is House Bill 329, which I'll talk about in a bit, but it is a major change for going forward. And then, of course, launching educational programs about the benefits of zero-emission vehicles and dispelling the myths. We can't tell people what vehicles to buy or which ones, but we can inform them about the benefits, as well as dispelling the myths that that are often out there. The goal of the plan is, as previously mentioned, is to have 80,000 zero-emission vehicles registered in our state by the end of 2025. Before the launch of the plan, North Carolina had just under 6,000 registered electric vehicles and just over 6,000 registered plug-in hybrids, for about a total of 12,000 vehicles. As of August of this year, more than 13,000 electric vehicles and around 8,500 plug-in hybrid vehicles are registered in North Carolina. That's close to 22,000 vehicles. Some progress so far. Also, the department has had significant reduction of both our water usage and energy consumption. We have started statewide polling and testing to locate areas where both the desire and need to have electrification infrastructure in place. We've also launched numerous statewide outreach programs to educate people on the benefits. We do have ongoing progress. The department's Division of Aviation has been working closely with our state airports to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles and equipment. Some of the light and heavy use vehicles and equipment that was previously talked about are used quite frequently at airports. The Integrated Mobility Division, which helps foster the development of public transportation, is helping facilitate the move towards electric fleets in our state's various public transportation systems. And finally, we continue working on developing the appropriate signage and indication for our future ZEV corridors. I did want to point out one of the items that we have done here is that our logo programs, such as everyone's seen the blue signs on the side of the highways. If a business has electric charging stations, we do allow them to put that on their logo so they can inform people who may go to their business with electric vehicles that there is a charging opportunity at those sites. A major step forward for the ZEV plan came last year with the General Assembly's passing of House Bill 329. This bill allowed electricity for electric vehicles to be sold by non-public utilities, greatly increasing the accessibility of charging stations and hopefully encouraging gas stations and other businesses to integrate charging stations into their existing setup. In the past, businesses couldn't charge for electricity, they could only give it away. That really wasn't much of an incentive for people to go and put in charging stations when they had to give again, the electricity away. Now they can recoup some of their investment, which will help encourage further investment in charging stations. Well, as we all know, COVID-19 has created some challenges. Our plans for 2020 were to conduct several outreach events, both standalone as well as with some of the pre-established conferences. Many of these things have been, in fact, most have been canceled and severely hampered. We've also seen some of the delays in our actions. For instance, the Century Center, which is one of our larger facilities at DOT, we plan to convert all those vehicles to electric vehicles. That's been delayed until 2021. But even with these delays, we are still moving forward with installing portable charging stations at these facilities that run off solar power to aid in the eventual transition. I really don't want to end on a downer such as what the pandemic has caused. I want to end on a note of optimism and opportunity. Electric vehicles are leading the way in the connected and autonomous vehicle world. Why? A lot of people ask that question. Because it's good business. Just think of how all these technologies and these developments are crossing. The synergies between these, it's really becoming the way of the transportation future. Some of those opportunities include reduced cost of transportation. Transportation cost touches everything that we have. Everything in your house, everything in your office has a transportation cost. If we can reduce those costs, then it affects everything else. Expands the service to the underserved. Just think how the self-driving connected electric vehicles will be able to continue as we age and can no longer drive, we can still be self-dependent with this equipment and saving lives. This technology is one of the things that will save lives. Not only will self-driving vehicles reduce crashes and injuries, but also the electrification will make air quality and you know the folks who have breathing concerns easier to breathe, and improve quality of life. If reduced emissions and pollution, reduce loss of loved ones, and reducing the cost of transportation, and also reducing the impact on the human impact on the climate, all those are win-win-wins for our state and the world when we start looking at these technologies. And we do have folks who want to talk about, you know, this technology will be a major job disruption. Again, those are folks who want to bring bring us on a down note. North Carolina has gone through job disruptions in the past. We continue to be the largest tobacco producing state, one of the largest furniture producing states, if not the largest, and textiles. All those industries are much smaller today, but we continue to grow. We're one of the fastest growing states, and we're producing more jobs. And we see clean energy as one of those areas, and technology is one of those areas where we see as opportunities for the future. And North Carolina we're poising ourselves to be in that position to help be that leader in these areas. My rush presentation is there and over with. I'll be prepared for questions when the opportunity comes.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you, Sushma. I really appreciate the presentations. In order to stick with the schedule, I think we're going to go ahead and skip the Q&A, but please keep your questions in mind for the fishbowl later. I'll also say reach out to me or Kevin or Sushma at any time with questions about any of the presentations, or I'll say in general, please do reach out to us. We want to stay engaged with you all when it comes to moving North Carolina forward on vehicle electrification. Sue, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Sushma. Thank you, Kevin. That was really helpful. We did have some questions come in, and we'll make sure those get to the right people to answer separately. But that was just a great overview. A couple of things that stuck out in my mind where I appreciated Sushma's point about how this EV revolution is a global revolution. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, especially as we think about how to keep our global competitiveness here in the US and keep moving forward alongside the rest of the world, hopefully in front of the rest of the world at some point. And then I really appreciated, Kevin, your points about the need to dispel some of the myths that are out there. That's a big, you're nodding, that's a, it's a big thing about EVs is lots of misunderstandings and maybe even misinformation that we can all do, all do a better job of helping address. And you left us on a positive note, Kevin, and I think we're going to continue with that positive note as we move to our next speaker. So with that, I'm going to turn things to Sean Ackley. We are thrilled to have Sean with us today. He's going to continue to speak to the economic development aspects of electric vehicles. He's head of managed services, as you see there, for e-mobility and future grids for Siemens, and has been working on this topic for a long time. He'll bring in some of the grid-related aspects of this as well, talk about some of the ways that Siemens right here in North Carolina is helping create EV jobs. He's got a great background in education, has lived in North Carolina for over 30 years. And Sean, you win the coolest headshot ever award. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it over.
Yeah, I was going to say you need to add part-time Ron Burgundy lookalike as one of those titles as well. Fair enough. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to share my screen, and please also confirm that you can see my screen okay.
All right.
All good?
I think it is loading. Yep, we're all good. Thanks, Sean.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you again. Yeah, as said, head of the Managed Services Organization for Siemens e-Mobility, which is just a big wordy title for all things catch-all that are service related to our e-mobility charging infrastructure products. So that could be everything from classical services, maintenance, warranty, parts, supply chain, to as well as sort of our digital services, software as a service type stuff. So yeah, Raleigh resident for almost 30 years, not over 30 years, almost there, and NC State grad. Just so excited to be part of the overall equation that includes the build out and the embracing of this technology in North Carolina. So to that effect, I want to talk today a little bit about the infrastructure, not just the charger itself, but the overall infrastructure equation that taps into both sides of the equation of our economic development, not just in the products themselves, but also the overall solution that is required to charge the vehicles, the electric vehicles that we're trying to transition to. So what I'm showing on.
Just jump in real quick. Sorry, we can hear you pretty well, but if there's any way that you know to let us hear you a little bit better, we really want to hear everything you have to say.
All right. How about if I lean a little closer to my microphone?
That would be great.
Any better?
Thank you. Perfect.
All right. Now brown cow. Now brown cow. All right. So what I'm showing on screen here are, if you've heard of Siemens, if you've worked with Siemens, it's probably for one of these more traditional and classical pieces of electrical infrastructure. Everything from the power generation side, if you're a utility partner, a coalition that's embracing some of the clean technologies like photovoltaic or wind power, as addition to the traditional power generation gensets, gas turbines, that type of stuff. Siemens is there. You know us from that side of our business, all the way through the portfolio there, through power distribution, transmission, down to the low voltage side, the power that feeds your building, your house, your apartment complex, your bus depot. We certainly operate in all these realms, but it's only important because I want to identify when we say infrastructure, we don't just mean the charger itself. There's all of the make-ready equipment, and you're going to hear a term that Siemens refers to a lot, and as many people do in the industry, the plug-to-grid equation solution that brings the power from the utility all the way to the charger itself. So all of these play a part. So like I mentioned, this is sort of where Siemens operates, but maybe you have or have not been aware of all the different types of chargers that Siemens is also producing. So this is just a quick splash screen. I won't spend a lot of time on it. But if you are in the project phase where you're trying to decide what type of equipment that you're going with, you probably are dealing with the terminology level 1, level 2, level 3 charger. So that range, we have something on every range of the spectrum there, all the way from the sort of far left-hand side, the sort of residential, commercial style level 2 charger, plug-in charger for a vehicle, all the way up to everything on the right-hand side being something that's a little bit more industrial for fleet applications, you know, your bus chargers, your delivery and logistics vehicles, electric vehicle chargers. So we run the gamut there. Okay, so we talked about what is infrastructure. It's that technology. That is what we say when we mean infrastructure, but it is still more than that as well. We'll tap into each of those pieces. But what we're talking about is infrastructure's play in economic development, in particular in North Carolina. But when we say economic development, it's job growth, it's the partnerships we're building with the different organizations that you will be engaging with to see your vision come to fruition. And then how do we get that done? That's the magic piece of the equation is funding. How do we get work done so that we can stimulate growth? So let's get into that. From a Siemens perspective, we have a plant of manufacturing in Wendell, North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh, if you're not familiar, where I live. And the Wendell facility builds one of those pieces of charging infrastructure in our portfolio. It builds one of our medium-duty, heavy-duty chargers. The Wendell facility builds other things. It's been around for a long time. And I've been working in this facility for about 6 years now. It's a pretty great place to work. But since we started embracing this new technology in North Carolina, we've decided that this is a great point of operations for one of those charging technologies. And that just started in early 2019. And let alone all the other pieces that are part of the overall equation, we've added 15 full-time headcount to support the manufacturing and engineering requirements for that one product just in 2019. And just like every other hockey stick chart that shows the growth plan for e-mobility, we're seeing that same hockey stick growth curve for the demand for that equipment, which will have that same effect on the need for new jobs and professional and technical people to work in the facility. So we're expected to double that by next year, if not better. And just a little back of the napkin math, about every 60 of those MVHD chargers that we sell incrementally is 10 new manufacturing jobs in North Carolina alone. So that's great. We're really excited that that is a growth metric. These are high-skilled manufacturing jobs. These are job security jobs. I mean, you will be in high demand wherever you want to go if you can put on your resume that you've been involved in manufacturing of this cutting-edge technology. Really cool stuff. So jobs important. But on the next slide here, when we talk about job growth, we're not just talking about the production of that one piece of equipment. Generally speaking, if you're going to create a fleet conversion project, or you're creating a new facility that's going to embrace this new EV technology, you're talking about a huge project, a solution. And so I won't spend too much time on any particulars on this slide that I'm showing here, but only to help exemplify the reaching technologies that you'll need to build, like, for example, a bus depot here, or a transit hub. You might have a microgrid. You might have some on-site storage. You might have various different charger technologies you're bringing in. And each of those have manufacturing plants. And a lot of those, for Siemens, luckily, are in North Carolina, and a lot of the jobs that could be stimulated in such a solution, not just in actual construction, but in just the ideation phase, the engineering, the consultation, all of that's very local. It's really important to keep in mind all of the different small sectors of the industry that get touched when you start just putting pen to paper for one of these projects. And that, yet another fun picture in the background there is, you got to consider the construction aspect as well. The fun picture on the left there, I was in Manhattan on the west side putting in an overhead charger for the MTA out there. Pictures in LA, we're doing these projects all over, and we are hiring local trade workers, union, non-union, excavators, diggers, heavy haulers, riggers, lifters, crane operators, you name it, the full gamut has to get hired. And just another quick napkin math statistic there. For every dollar you're going to spend on equipment, you're likely going to spend $2 to $3 on construction and engineering services. So when we talk about economic development, the equipment is a piece, but it's such an enabler for everything else that's in your area. Moving on beyond the job growth perspective, I wanted to kind of touch on partnership. And so partnership is not just who do you partner with to identify technologies that you might need, but again, that sort of plug the grid, catchy term. It's utility partnerships. It's all of these OEMs that generate the technology probably have partnerships with engineering and consult firms that can help you figure out the equation that brings that power to your door and enables what you need. But what you might need is also things in the form of a stable cost of ownership, or a stable operating expenditure, something that's predictable. If you're working with your utility and you're determining your rate structure and you want to avoid demand charges, you need to work with OEM providers or technology providers that have software that can calculate and stabilize and level your charging plot over the day, so that you can sort of stabilize your cost of operation. And stabilizing your cost of operation also frees up some cash flow, so you can turn back into investment in the infrastructure itself. But that partnership from plug to grid is something you have to consider. Who are you going to engage throughout the design of your overall project? And then the big one, funding. How do we get this done? So I won't steal any of the thunder. You got some great folks from each of these organizations that are going to be talking today about all the investments that they're making and all the investment opportunities or funding mechanisms that are available to you. But let's say you've missed an opportunity, you missed a window. How do we get going? I actually had a great conversation with a public works director in a small town in Illinois. It was a fun realization moment for me, where he asked, hey, great to meet you. We want to embrace EV technology. We want to get the project going off the ground. How do we get some of that ELOM money? Give me some of that ELOM money. How do we get that? And it was kind of funny because I never thought about it from that perspective. Where do we go? How do we find this stuff? If you're just getting into this industry, or just transitioning out of a more classical transportation industry, where do we find these opportunities? Well, if you've gone through some of these opportunities in North Carolina here, you've missed the boat, or maybe Just purely thinking about from a COVID perspective, maybe some of your capital funding had to be spent elsewhere. You were a little lean this year. You can work with someone like the OEM for different things that we would call charger or charging as a service. So that infrastructure, as opposed to being a capital investment, could be something that's kind of like a lease program. And they're kind of neat to think about from the perspective of sort of, again, making it sort of an interval-based cost expenditure to your organization, spreading it out, not making it a huge upfront investment, but also from the perspective of protecting yourself against obsolescence. A lot of those technologies evolving so quickly. You make a huge investment in your infrastructure, investing in your area, investing in your community, and then in a year or 2 years, that stuff's obsolete. So as industry standards change, as we evolve, as the technology improves, something like charger or charging as a service allows you to say, okay, I don't necessarily want to capitally invest in the infrastructure. I want it here. I want it in my community. And when it's obsolete, I want you to come take it out and put in the next great thing. So it's something to consider certainly as a mechanism to seeing your project through to fruition. So I raced through a ton of stuff, and again, I sort of skipped over this pictographic on what Siemens is calling charger or charging as a service. But I know we were going to have a lot of overlap, and I wanted to speed through it and leave any time, if needed, for some Q&A. If you don't have any questions you want to ask now, if I was too high level on any topics that you'd love to drive down, please reach out by email or reach out through the organization here. Anyways, I'll turn it back over. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Great. Hey, thank you, Sean. I know you did cover a lot of really great information there. Loved being able to see, like, on the ground, stuff is happening, you know, right in everyone's backyard. I think that's a really compelling story. I think thinking about the whole supply chain that's associated with the EV rollout is really compelling. And I know there's been a number of recent reports that have come out documenting, you know, jobs currently in North Carolina and the opportunity to grow them. So it's great to get that story from you as well. We're going to go ahead and get moving to our next speaker. So apologies for not having time for questions, but do feel free to put them in the chat, and we can direct them to folks so they can reply. And also keep thinking of things for the fishbowl if this is sparking ideas in your mind. We'll also have a chance after we hear from Representative Zoka to share a little bit in a fun word cloud exercise that we're going to take you through. So please do keep going with that. So let's go ahead and move ahead here. Oops. I'm going to go back and share my screen here. So we are thrilled to now hear from a North Carolina legislative leader in this area. Representative John Zoka is serving his 4th term in the North Carolina House of Representatives. He is a member of the North Carolina House leadership team, including being elected as the House Republican Conference leader. He's also a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. And in the legislature, as many as you may know, he's been a very strong voice for renewable energy and consumer choice. And we're excited to see that he's now bringing that passion to the area of EVs. He is the sponsor of the bill that was mentioned earlier by Kevin, HB 329, that created a free market for EV charging stations in the state. And we welcome hearing from Representative Zoka about where he sees EVs going in North Carolina, and any preview you want to offer for the coming legislative session as well. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'd like to talk about what you said, where we see EVs going, but what I want to do first for people on the call is talk a little bit about how do you talk to legislator about EVs and things that maybe they can't conceptualize too good because it is really new to markets. The first slide here that you're looking at is a picture of Fifth Avenue, New York City, and it's really hard to see the automobile. I helped out by circling with that red highlighter right in the middle. Everything else is horses. This is 1900. And next slide, please. So you flip forward 13 years, just 13 years, and you can't spot a horse anywhere. Now, we all know that cars were not ubiquitous across the American landscape until many years later. Auto insurance wasn't a thing until 1929. So why do we see in 1913 this street packed with cars? And the simple answer is is that the mayor of New York and the borough presidents, they were tired of dealing with horse manure. They were trying to get their city into, the show place for the world, if you will. So they outlawed horses in the middle of New York City, and only vehicles could be there. So what's the point there? The point is that you have technology, which at the time was racing far ahead of where laws were. So lawmakers, in that case, the city fathers, decided that they would enforce a standard onto the city. And you can see very plainly what happened. And we know the rest of the story is that because the technology was so much better than horse-drawn vehicles, it took over. I believe we're actually in a similar circumstance with EVs right now. If you go back 10 years, there were only a few EVs. Now, frankly, I've lost track. Last time I looked, there were 46 different models of cars that were either fully electric or partially electric. So the challenge that lawmakers have at every level is, are the laws currently abreast with technology? Next slide. Looking to that, when I looked at EVs, that the laws were not abreast. Now, I don't personally own an electric vehicle, but I knew that one of the things was EV charging. For EVs to really take off, you have to have more charging stations. So the real roadblock there was not being able to have retail resale of electricity. In North Carolina, it's a little more complicated. Sometimes people try and do third-party sales, which is expressly prohibited. Retail resale is what I went for. The bill itself was only 2 paragraphs, but it took over 10 months to get the words right on 1 page in 2 paragraphs where we could get all the stakeholders on board to agree to essentially a free market solution. And what it does, it allows you, if you're a gas station, as Kevin Lacey had said earlier, you could give electricity away for free, but how does that even make sense? I mean, so some grocery stores put it in their parking lots in an attempt to attract customers. It worked for EV owners, but it wasn't really the answer to getting more EVs on the road. The answer is let the free market dictate if EVs are going to be successful or not. Personally, I think they are. So we have to have the charging structure there. So retail resale, it's now the law. So who are some of the people that really wanted this? Car manufacturers, for one. Surprisingly, the apartment association was very much in favor of it because they wanted the ability, when they build new apartment complexes for younger generations than myself, and they wanted to appeal to people so they could put in charging stations and include that as a part of the actual build out, rather than putting in apartments, tearing up, parking lots and installing it later. So the bill to you and I might make a whole lot of sense, but I will tell you, it was not an easy thing to accomplish. And it took about 10 months to get 2 paragraphs so that everybody agreed where the semicolons went and the periods and all the words. And now it's there. So actually, I don't know how many EV charging stations have been installed. Probably some of the industry folks can tell me that. But the point of the matter is that now, if you want to put in EV charging stations, a regular one or a fast charger or whatever the next technology is, you can do it in North Carolina. I think that's huge. I know that Duke Energy is putting $76 million into doing what they want to do, which is good. That helps. But I really look to free market solutions to problems. Next slide. So this slide and the next slide just show really, and everybody on this call probably already knows this information already, is why EVs are taking off and why the batteries for large solar fields is also taking off and making the cost of energy fall. It's just where technology leads us. So the challenge as a legislator, and the challenge that I would give to every one of you, is that when you talk to legislators and you're advocating for a policy, you have to show them the facts and show them where technology is taking us, talk about free markets, and talk about consumer desires. Because when the facts are all in, it's not government who's going to control whether people buy EVs, it's consumers. I went to my dealership and said, I drive an Acura, and I said, when are we going to have a fully electric Acura? He said, well, it's coming, we've got this kind of thing. So, I mean, even myself, because what do consumers want to do? They want to save money. They want to do things that are good for the environment, no matter what party or who they are. When it boils down to that. So when you're talking to legislators, just remind them of what consumer demand is driving, and that you're for free market solutions. Next slide. And this again shows, just the falling cost of battery packs. And again, this should be no surprise to anybody. So I think I have one more slide, which is this is me. This is all my contact information. I would be happy to answer any questions. Again, I've said it like 3 or 4 times already. When you talk to legislators at whatever level, please reinforce that consumers, want EVs. That's where the market is leading, and that you're for free market solutions. Now, there's all kind of grants and things out there at the federal level, and I'm not saying that's bad, but technology will drive us. And the challenge that I and other legislators have is to keep the laws current with where technology and consumer demand are driving us. So that's my presentation. I did leave a couple minutes for any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Zoka. Great to have your leadership there and your optimism and enthusiasm. Just curious if you're working on anything in terms of next steps, any barriers you're trying to tackle next?
Well, the next barrier comes up November 3rd, to be quite honest. So once I get past that barrier, there are some things, but I really look forward to the industry telling me where we need to go next. I knew that charging stations was a big issue in the area of renewable energy. And I'm wearing my renewable energy tie, if everybody can see it, all the colors of the sun here. I became when I went to Raleigh 8 years ago, I was a skeptic. I thought solar energy was only propped up by government, and EVs were a thing that was somebody's dream of George Jetson. But I listened to folks and found out that I was wrong. I changed my mind, and look what you got now. You've got me as the speaker on your panel. What happened to me was what needs to happen to every legislator on a variety of issues is they need to know what the facts are, and you need to present facts to legislators in a very honest way, saying not only all the good parts of things, but also what some of the negatives might be, so people can make fully informed decisions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And that's a great a lead into the session we'll be having after our soon to be coming coffee break with a number of leading industry players. So everyone out there, please stay tuned. Thank you again, Representative. Great to have you. And good luck to you as well.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, we've scheduled just a little bit of time before we move into the coffee break, as I mentioned. We've called this session, How Do We Rev It Up in North Carolina? And our hope here is to get a little bit of greater interaction here with all of you. You should have seen in the text box an opportunity to be part of a Menti program, MENTI. So over the next few minutes, we're going to be jointly collaborating on creating some word clouds that reflect what we've heard so far, and just kind of gather some very real-time reactions and thoughts about what you're hearing. So I'm going to give folks just a minute to go ahead and try to load up this app. If you go to www.menti.com, you're going to see that there's a password that you should be able to use to get into our section of that. So I'll give folks just a minute there, and then we're going to go ahead and ask you just a few quick questions. I think you'll be excited about what you'll see there on the screen. All right, so if you see there, there's that code 2525594. All right, so here's our first question. And if you could type into the app there, after hearing these opening remarks that we've heard from a number of folks, what pops to mind in terms of North Carolina's greatest EV adoption achievements and policy actions that you're proud of as a North Carolinian? Got some good things going there. Well, I have to say Executive Order 80 is holding strong. And of course, that spawned a lot of other actions. And then I think that multi-state MOU on medium duty, heavy duty, the most recent kind of action that's been taken, again, at the gubernatorial level, also seems to be a close contender. Of course, EO 80 and Executive Order 80 kind of have to combine those, I guess. So people spell it and put spaces in different ways. So have to take that into account. But I think by and large, it looks like we definitely have a winner in terms of that. But I think what's also exciting is that that's not the only thing, right? There's looks like over a dozen or more actions that have been happening and have already happened in North Carolina. So I think that's really exciting to see that and to kind of have that shared understanding there. So we have a second question we're going to go to. And the question is, what policy action would you like to see North Carolina take to continue increasing EV adoption? So this is like, what are the things that haven't happened thus far? Where do we want to take things? And this is going to be a great lead into some of the discussions we have this afternoon. So we've got a bunch of options here. Well, I think what this slide and this question and these answers demonstrate is that we have many, many things that we can pursue in North Carolina. I'll put a plug in now for and a reference to a report that we just collaborated on. It's called the Achieve Toolkit. And in that toolkit, we had 50 different EV policy options that we examined. And I think it really speaks to the maturity of the policy environment here, where it's moved beyond incentives, which are great and fantastic, to lots of other policies that can be put in place. So great to see all the ideas coming in there. We have time really quickly for just one more question, and we'll close it out. It's again a little bit of a lead into the future here. The future today, the very near future. Was there anything that didn't get answered? What questions do you have of this morning's speakers that we didn't yet answer? I know people had some questions in the chat, and hopefully throughout the course of the presentation, some of those got answered, but what else is on your mind that you're hoping to hear about through the course of the afternoon? All right, so how do we get North Carolina as a leader, national leader? How do we get more support for infrastructure? There's a question about funding. We can scroll through the rest of them, but good questions. I know we've got a great set of panels coming out, and in the course of that, hope to get to as many of these questions as we can. And there may even be some folks that want to share their own answers in the chat. So happy to have a little crowdsourcing on this as well. But I want to pause and give ourselves the break that everybody has earned. You've been great and been very, very attentive, and we've been excited about the start here and the chance to get things rolling and find out what's been going on in North Carolina. Do a handoff right now to Ben Prohaska, our national director. He's going to go ahead and introduce our great panelists here for our fireside chat and just jump in for a great conversation. Go ahead, Ben.
Great. Well, thank you. And, you know, people want to hate the DJ, you can target me because it is my quick efforts to turn on the Amazon Alexa oops, as I just started to activate it. So anyways, connect with everyone. I'm very excited to be a part of this and excited for this panel. You know, joining me today, I'm just going to briefly introduce folks and then jump right into the questions because we don't have a ton of time. And frankly, with this group of folks, I think we could probably spend a couple hours digging into the details on transportation electrification. So we'll get as far as we can. But the idea here is we're going to go through just some round robin style questions, hear from our panel of experts, and you know, hopefully gives the crowd here an opportunity to learn a little bit more about some of the different ways that transportation electrification is affecting all of us. I guess just for background, I'm the National Director for the Electrification Coalition. I've been with the organization about 7 years, and to create a little location, I'm actually based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So, you know, I'm in the home state for this effort. So that's an exciting moment and for all of us. So joining me today is Jed Ruth, who's the VP of Sales and Marketing for Thomas Built Buses. For people who aren't aware, Thomas Built is a North Carolina company, and Jed's been with them for about 24 years on that effort. And so exciting to see Thomas bringing electrification to their lineup. Also, Richard Culley from Arrival, who's the head of safety and regulatory affairs, pardon me. John Fenton, Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs for Volvo Group North America. And then finally, Asaf Nagler from ABB, who's the Senior Director of Government Affairs. So a great panel of experts bringing a lot of different kind of connections to the table. And ABB is another one that has a really strong presence. In fact, Asaf can correct it, but their North American headquarters is based right here in North Carolina as well. So with that, I'm going to start with an opening question, and I'm going to ask each of you if you could take a couple minutes to offer your thoughts on this, and we'll do it round robin style. What are you most excited about for EVs in North Carolina? And so, Jed, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Thanks. So, I mean, I think there's the obvious. I mean, I'm excited about, you know, doing some good for the environment. I'm excited about energy security, and just selfishly here, we have a cool new product, you know, so that's an exciting time in a company when you're going through that. But I think, you know, just to get a little further, and for those of you that aren't familiar so much with school bus, first of all, EV is pretty much a perfect fit for us for range. I mean, there's still range anxiety in the commercial vehicle market. We don't have it in school bus. Range is a perfect fit for us, so we overcome that quickly. Duty cycle is also a perfect fit, and then a majority of buses return to base, and so you have that ability to charge. So all those things just kind of make it a perfect fit for our market. And then the other thing, you know, I've been in this business for 24 years, and we're proud of what we do. I mean, we think we do a public good in getting kids to and from school. We've got a fantastic safety record. But what I always get, specifically when it comes to budgets and things like that, is people say, hey, you know, first of all, your vehicle operates 180 days a year, 5 hours a day, and it's expensive, and what are we doing for that? And with V2G, it's like suddenly a school bus becomes this public good, that didn't exist before. I mean, during the time when the grid needs it most, summertime when it's hot, that bus can be sitting there as a storage facility to do a couple of things. I mean, we can stabilize the grid, or we can make money for the districts, and suddenly we become this environmental utility for our customers and for the state. And so, we just signed a deal with Dominion Energy in Virginia, and that is why. It's because they want that storage facility that a school bus offers. So really exciting times for us, and that's mostly what it is.
Great. And I can speak from personal, I have a 9-year-old, and I would love to get her on one of the first electric buses in North Carolina as she heads off to school. So hopefully we can figure out how to make that happen. So Dawn, I'd love to hear the same, a response from you on the same question. What are you most excited about for North Carolina?
Well, what I'm really excited about is to see the level of interest and the willingness by folks in North Carolina to help accelerate bringing these vehicles to market. We have, Volvo Group has our Volvo Lights project in California, where we have a commercial pilot bringing 23 Class 8 battery electric vehicles to market. And of course, the state of California is doing a lot to try and accelerate this market, but the state of California is not a sufficient market to sustain continued growth here. So we need a bigger market, and we need other states that have an interest in these vehicles. And plus, our headquarters is in North Carolina. It's our North American headquarters for Volvo Group North America. And for some of you may not know that Volvo Group also owns Mack Trucks. And so it's actually the global headquarters for Mack Trucks. And so we not only want to be able to sell products in our own home state, but we also, it's great for our employees who know that they're doing, good jobs bringing these great advanced technology vehicles to market, and that they can benefit personally from them, seeing them, on the roads where they live and work.
Great. Richard, I'd love to have you, as we continue the same question and the theme here, but what do you think Arrival is specifically excited about North Carolina and EVs?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. And just for everyone's awareness, Arrival we're a very new company, and so we're developing what we call an integrated transportation ecosystem that's really going to have all of those essential parts of medium and heavy duty electrification. So through technologies, through vehicles, and then a number of sort of services and mobility products. And so I think to echo a number of Dawn's points there, yeah, I think it's incredibly exciting to see some of the leadership at the state and local level in North Carolina that are developing a number of these targets and plans for electrification that are really considering all of those critical aspects of education, of infrastructure, and sort of partnerships and incentives. So I think, yeah, some of the great examples that were mentioned earlier around Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, and then the plan that the North Carolina DOT put together, but then also like the Charlotte Mayor Lyles and the plan that they put out in 2018 that really set some of these ambitious targets. And then obviously that then led to part of winning the Bloomberg Clean Cities Climate Challenge. And so I think all of these are really testament to the leadership at the state and local level. I think it was mentioned earlier as well, having North Carolina be one of the 15 states that signed on to the medium and heavy duty MOU that is really creating this program specifically for medium and duty vehicles, and then rolling out these and accelerating the deployment of this and the infrastructure to support their growth. I think a key part of that is to sort of recognizing that sort of diesel heavy duty vehicles have a very negative effect on the climate, but also on community health, on children's well-beings, and on sort of the workforce in sort of low and income and minority communities that are too often disproportionately affected by that pollution. And so that is really a key piece of this. And all of this is really aligned to Arrival's vision and the reason why we're initially focusing on medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. And I think tomorrow we have that the first NESCOM stakeholder meeting to really take that MOU and start to put it into an action plan. And then just finally, I think then having Duke Energy as one of those national leaders in electrification, being based in North Carolina is very exciting, not just for some of their EV specific programs, but also their sort of commitment to electrifying their fleet. And so again, this is we have a range of products that we're hoping to be able to deploy in all of these different areas through North Carolina.
Great. And Asaf, why don't you jump in? And I think we're continuing the theme here of North Carolina-based businesses, but as I should have mentioned, please introduce people to ABB a little bit, because probably one of the bigger companies that people aren't that familiar with. or might
Sure.
not be nervous, I should say.
Well, Ben, it's always good to see you. Can't do it in person these days, but glad to see you online here. So thanks for the opportunity to join. You know, we're really excited about the vision and possibilities in North Carolina. As you mentioned, you know, ABB's U.S. headquarters are here. We have 5 manufacturing facilities here and 2,500 employees across the state. So, you know, we are all in and committed to North Carolina, but we're also all in on zero emission transportation, right? So we are global provider of charging infrastructure, 14,000 DC fast chargers deployed. We're electrifying ports, marine vessels, ferries. So we're all in on this vision, and we're really glad to see you know, North Carolina take a lead on it. Again, our home state. We want to do it here first. So I guess what I'm most excited about is the opportunities here. The governor's executive order is a great, you know, initial marker. But there are a lot of policy opportunities for us to accomplish here, and it can't be done in just a stroke of a pen. So there's a lot of work to do, and I'm excited to collaborate with everyone. The work you're doing, bringing us all together, I think is really important because we have to do it together. It's not a one-man show here. So just really excited about the opportunity and to make some progress here in the state.
In a moment of moderator prerogative here, Don, you know, it'd be helpful, you talked about California, but you all are involved in maybe one of the early stage, and just soft bringing it up, early stage sort of port efforts and freight electrification efforts. And do you want to just quickly maybe give people a little, pun intended, light on what's happening in California?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, and I referenced it by name earlier, but so Volvo is involved in a project called Volvo Lights, and this is a project that is co-funded between Volvo and the state of California. It's actually a $90 million project, and in this project, we are bringing 23 battery electric vehicles, all Class 8 vehicles, to market to be used in commercial operation with 2 fleets. NFI and DHE, Dependable Highway Express, which is a more localized fleet out in California. But what's really unique about this project, I should say, and the project has started running last year and it will go through the middle of 2021. So we're really in the thick of it right now. And what's really unique about this project is, unlike in the past where you would bring a new vehicle to market, you know, with upgraded technology, I mean, you would just introduce it and that's it. But obviously here with electric vehicles, there's so much more in the whole ecosystem that has to be addressed. And so this project actually has 14 different partners involved that range from not only Volvo and the fleets, but also several of the infrastructure providers. And we have community colleges that are doing a workforce development portion of this. There are the local ports there. There's actually a community development organization that's involved in terms of doing outreach to what California terms disadvantaged communities about the project. So it really is extensive, and it really is a holistic look at bringing these vehicles to market and what's necessary to really make it succeed.
Great. We it seems like this group of folks on this panel right now, we could basically create the same kind of project here in North Carolina. We've already got the right group of folks together. Maybe just to
absolutely.
jump.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and for those who are interested in looking more at it, I'll do the selfish plug of you can visit www.lightsproject.com. And you'll find all kinds of information there. And ABB is working with us on I should have mentioned that ABB is working with us very closely on the project and providing the equipment that's in that project too.
The software, you're going to jump in, or mostly just say that you guys are a part
I
of
was just saying we're already working together, so let's do it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. Let's make it bi-coastal, right?
Right. Exactly.
How does California get all the fun toys? So speaking of, I think we're setting up a lot of things, right? We talked earlier in the conversation that a lot of transportation electrification for a lot of the public, and even people who, are engaged as policymakers, they just think of it as a light duty vehicle space because that's what we've heard the most about. And so, I think it's great that all of you are jumping in, and this panel really represents the idea that the technology is opening so many opportunities. And I think in some ways, in a bit of a William Gibson-esque, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. I think we could take that to the technology space too. So I'm going to go into this next question of for all of you, what are the challenges you're most concerned about, and what role can state policy play in addressing them? So I think, Jed, just to come back to you again for a second, buses represent a really compelling opportunity, but there's no doubt that just like any new technology, there's challenges around getting up to speed with the people who are going to buy these things and put them in. And so what kind of opportunities exist in North Carolina?
Yeah, I think the challenges are that even now, the total cost of ownership is approaching neutral if you look vehicle to vehicle with diesel. Not quite there, but not far away. But the problem is everything else, right? So there's obviously the startup infrastructure that has to be done. So that's a funding need, number one. But then number two, it's also just a fear. I mean, we've got people who have done the same thing the same way for years and years and years, and now they've got something totally new from how do I do this? How do I get permits? Who does it? Who do I call? I'm not doing business with the people I've typically done business with. So there's this startup infrastructure fear, and I think there's just this startup readiness fear. I mean, if you think about you're a school bus facility and you've got a guy that's worked on diesel buses forever, and that's what he does, and now suddenly he becomes a master electrician instead of a master mechanic. You have to scale up for that. And your local fire department who knows this is what I do in an accident, it's different now. And so there's just all these tentacles that it has that I mean, we think we've done a pretty good job. Identifying that, but we don't know that we've gotten everything. And I think that also there's this change in the model. So I mean, our typical model, a contractor or a school district buys a bus for X dollars and has their maintenance expense already figured, and now the new model is you're going to spend a lot more of that up front, but then you're not going to spend a lot more of that on the back end, but it's just not set up that way currently. So that we have to take a good look at how we've got a part to play in that as a manufacturer, particularly one with a leasing organization that we are involved with, but also districts and states have to think about that too, because without that kind of initial jump, we're not going to solve that chicken and egg problem of the bus costs too much because we don't have enough scale, but we don't have enough scale because it costs too much. So some of those things are to be figured out. I think it's there. I mean, I think it's certainly doable, but there's a lot of work to be done from all parties.
Maybe to change the chicken and egg to make it a little more Southern, it's a chicken and waffles moment.
Yeah.
I think some of this is that they go really well together, and sometimes we have a tendency to think one has to happen before the other, right? But I think that there's a little bit of an opportunity for them to go well together. So maybe, Richard, I think and thanks for introducing a little bit of Arrival. You all are a new entrant. I think one of the interesting things is that transportation electrification, the technology is simpler, right? Like an electric motor is a very simple piece of technology we've been using for a long time too, but you all are bringing a modular design to this and a modular build. So what kind of challenges are you seeing as in North Carolina, and what kind of role can state policy play in addressing those? And
absolutely. And thanks for that little lead in. And so, we have been very vertically integrated. And so we've designed all of those components to be very modular. So that gives us this greater flexibility to make sure that we can design medium and heavy duty vehicles that are fit for purpose. And that really can be, we're not just trying to design one product that fits all of these different use cases. We've seen that whether it's in transit buses or whether it's in delivery, every operator has a different set of use cases. So making sure we have that flexibility in our model. And so in terms of challenges and how North Carolina can address this, so we really see that we're in this sort of phase right now of sort of early adopters. So it's sort of those companies and fleets and agencies like Duke and Charlotte and folks that are really starting to put in the plans to electrify and starting to deploy those vehicles. And so really need to start to build on that momentum and start to implement a number of policies to make sure that we can really start to accelerate this. And so that to put Arrival in that great position where we're not going to be able to build these quick enough. And that's where we ultimately we want to be. And so there's a number of areas that we're focusing on. I think to Jed's point, I think education there is key to this. Not just from the maintenance and first responders, but also making sure that we keep lessons learned and an open dialogue between fleets and operators and the manufacturers, because for us to design great vehicles that meet people's needs in terms of range and charging, we need to understand the duty cycles, exactly how these vehicles are used. And then also then coming the other way, like making sure that the total cost of ownership is understood. And so we're putting a lot of effort into how we build this model up to make sure that people understand the costs of deploying these. And then also, I think from the sort of the state and local leadership and the general public, sort of making them aware that a lot of this technology is available today. And so making sure that assumptions of previous vehicle generations of vehicles aren't going into and being used as the basis of that policy. Like a key example of this is the cost of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. There's always been an assumption that there are a great price increase over the battery, over the diesel version. And so Arrival's sort of core target is to hit price parity in the very near future with those vehicles. And so we need to start to put those assumptions into these policies. And so on that, I think from the state, as you start to develop sort of funding and incentives to help accelerate the fleet electrification, making sure that these funding mechanisms and grants are flexible enough so that it doesn't just consider the cost, the increased cost of a battery electric vehicle, but takes into account infrastructure and other products that the fleet operators need, whether that's extended warranty, fleet service, digital services, and things like this. So, and this is one of my core priorities, is making sure that if we deploy a price parity delivery vehicle with a battery electric vehicle with a diesel equivalent, that these that we're not priced out of these incentives, and that we can put the full benefit to those customers. I think as we start to scale this, I think making sure that we consider infrastructure and the vehicle transition plans as a whole, and that we're not trying to scale one without the other. It's trying to scaling infrastructure, as Jed mentioned, is incredibly complex, and so making sure that that is it has the view to eventually how many vehicles, electric vehicles, are going to be in that fleet. And then,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, and then I was going to say, yeah, and then having like utilities and folks like do starting to look at sort of rate design, and so that there's a little bit more consistency in when you start to charge and sort of try to plan out your electricity costs, making sure that the sort of the rate design and also the resiliency of the network is there so that we can really realize the final piece. And then just the final, just to wrap up on that, there's also a lot of innovation and technology development still to do in this range. And so we have some very long-term programs to really bring this next generation of technology to the market. And so having North Carolina sort of attract technology companies and manufacturers to the state, whether that's through sort of university and college programs that work on electrification and like automated driving systems, will really be key to pulling new talent and having sort of the next generation of engineers and people working on this.
So, you know, I'm going to come to you in a second, Don, but Asaf, you know, Richard brought up a lot around the issues and the interplay around infrastructure development. And, you know, you all have worked on this across the globe, but how do you think about North Carolina as an opportunity, and, you know, what kind of infrastructure policies are needed here to get that stuff to move faster?
Well, you know, I'd say that one thing I've learned, and something that we see across the space, is that there's no one size fits all for charging infrastructure. And accordingly, you can't have a one size fits all policy, right? It's really going to have to be comprehensive. So you just kind of look at the different types of cars and drivers out there. You have passenger cars, transit buses, regional delivery vans, long haul, Class A tractors. And with each of those different types of vehicles, you have different types of users, right? So for a passenger car, you might have a single family home dweller who has dedicated parking and can have charging. But also it might be a multi-unit dwelling without dedicated parking. You have TNC drivers like Uber and Lyft who often live in multi-unit dwellings, but then they log a lot of miles. And so they need public charging. Transit buses, sometimes they charge en route, sometimes they come home at night, charge in the depot. Same with delivery vans, and then long haul trucks. You know, they need megawatt level charging along the highway. And so every segment, every type of driver is a different animal. And so you can't have one size fits all policy. So it's really got to be soup to nuts. So that means, you know, from R&D to deployment targets and incentives, all the way to everyday life issues, zoning and permitting reform, right? If you're going to have public charging curbside, you know, you have to deal with right-of-ways, you have to deal with getting power to the site. In some cases, people live in condo buildings and condo boards don't let them put charging for their vehicles. So there's some localities that are looking at charging access rights for HOAs, electric EV ready building codes. So you can make it easy for buildings to go electric once the time comes. So, you know, there's no shortage of policy opportunities, and we can get into specifics on some of those if you like. But I guess the lessons that we take away is that you need a little bit of everything, and you can't just say, you know, we're going to create a deployment target and walk away and think you're done, right? It's really got to be a change that goes up and down the sector and the economy.
So Don, I had the opportunity to go to Gothenburg a bunch of years ago as part of the Smart City Challenge, and there was this really fun ad from Volvo actually that was the idea of the way that transportation electrification changes the space and the bus pulling into a depot, and the idea that you could literally close the garage door behind, right? Because there's no emissions. And that way it was sort of this sad person sitting outside waiting for the bus versus the new version of what buses are going to experience. Fortunately, we have a little better weather here in North Carolina, but what kind of policy opportunities has Volvo identified? And especially since you're, you know, North American HQs here, I'm sure that you'd love to see more on the road from Volvo. So how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you that is real. I actually have been on that bus in Gothenburg, and I have entered and boarded the bus from inside the building. So that is real. In terms of the challenges that, you know, we see, it's very similar. This is the challenge of going last. The biggest challenge is going last on a panel like this because everything's been said. You know, by far, I think we see that the biggest challenge here is on infrastructure and public funding issues. And infrastructure is just the availability of it, and then also public funding issues we think are critical, both in terms of the finding the funding available to pay for this expanded infrastructure, the expanded infrastructure needs, but also for the vehicles. Because I'll defer or disagree with Richard in a sense, at least in terms of our company and where we are. I can tell you that the initial diesel electric vehicles that are going to be coming onto market from Volvo and from Mack are going to be more expensive and significantly more expensive than the diesel equivalent. And so there will be a need to have some to help fleets that want to acquire these vehicles to help buy them down, and to enable more fleets to get their feet wet with these and have the experience, and to experience firsthand the advantages and the longer term benefits of operating these vehicles. You know, the one thing that we've learned from the Volvo Lights project in California is that installing and having the charging infrastructure ready is a lot more complicated and a lot more time consuming than one would imagine. And that's for a whole host of reasons, you know, everything from challenges in weather to COVID, you know, but even things like permitting. Asaf mentioned permitting issues and making sure that all the different players that are involved know what's happening. And so there's lots of factors. And so in terms of what, you know, policymakers or what can be done to help overcome some of these challenges, I think is, you know, recognizing that this is a whole paradigm shift in our transportation sector. And it's really important that all stakeholders work together to help make this a reality. And I think, you know, policymakers can help by, you know, looking at developing some of these funding programs, whether it be through utilities and charge ready programs, or it be through, you know, other forms of incentive programs. But also that the events like this, and there continue to be outreach to all the stakeholders that will be involved, because it's really key that you understand what their concerns and needs are going to be, so that they end up being supportive and not resistant. And I particularly highlight the fleets, because they are the ones that are facing the greatest risk dealing with technology that they're not familiar with. It's very different for them. And there are factors that, depending on their model of duty cycles and what they run, that it could impact their business operations. And so getting a full understanding of their concerns and their needs so that they can be brought on as willing partners is important. And I guess the last thing, I'll give a very specific example, and the reason this outreach and education is so important for all the stakeholders is because you don't know what you don't know. And the perfect example I'll share is in the Volvo Lights project in California. Part of that project includes having a public charging station for heavy duty vehicles. And we didn't realize when we started, but actually that there is a prohibition against heavy duty public charging stations in the state of California right now. And it was not intentional, but there was when charging infrastructure for light duty took off, and there was language put in to the Public Utilities Commission that made exceptions for reselling of electricity for light duty vehicles. Nobody was thinking about heavy duty vehicles. And so it specifically allows it for light duty, but by that it then prohibits it for heavy duty. And so we've had to make changes to the language in California to be able to do that. And so there's things like that you just don't know what you don't know. And so best to talk to everybody and get everybody involved and understand where they're coming from to make it successful and keep it moving forward.
Great. And just a quick note for folks that, please feel free to throw questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. And then also we'll use some of those for the upcoming fishbowl, which people aren't familiar. The idea is to kind of drill down on some of these issues a little bit further in a sort of open format, right? And so instead of, we're doing a great job of having experts share background, but this is a way then to get everybody sort of out of their virtual Zoom moment and have to talk a little bit. So hopefully you're thinking about some of those things coming up. So everybody here is bringing up some interesting challenges, right? There's this sort of CapEx versus OpEx. And so that's a capital expenditure, right? You got an upfront cost. What is that, how much is an EV on the front end because it's new technology? And in some ways, because the battery, which is actually part of the, what we traditionally think of as the fueling system is incorporated into the cost of the vehicle. And then you have the operational costs, right? And so, this is this thing where we're kind of dealing with a new way of thinking. And so I don't know if, with you, Jed, if there's anything that you're starting to see even with school districts already, right? They're always challenged with budgets, right? And COVID is making that even a tougher challenge. And so, buying new buses is, from a starting point is a challenge, but how do we get them to think a little bit more differently about the long-term opportunities and even, financing that we need to create that's going to allow this to happen faster?
Right. So there are that's a little bit of the Wild West right now in that area, just to be honest. So there's several entities that are trying to approach that themselves, saying, hey, we'll give you a package deal, and you kind of don't have to deal with some of those things that Dawn mentioned. We'll do the permitting, we'll get everything in place for you, and we'll do your maintenance, and we'll charge you a flat fee. I haven't seen any of those that made a ton of financial sense without grants yet. So we're still very much in the grant mode where we are, and I think that's what we've got to. I mean, it's our responsibility as a manufacturer to continue to drive efficiencies to get the cost where we don't have to do that. But for right now, that's the reality that we live in. We're very much into getting scale and production ready. I think that's our challenge. I think the challenge to maybe some of the stakeholders on this call is, just help us with a push in some way, whether it's some test markets to get buses out there, or some programs that say we're going to take advantage of V2G and see what that does for the community and the school district, and maybe even helps with funding. And then we've certainly got entities that are interested in the leasing side of that. But you're right, it's at the beginning, a lot of new ways to think. I think any push that we can have for either the carrot or the stick, I don't care which. I think we just kind of need the push right now.
And as Asaf, you mentioned that you had some specifics, right, if you wanted to get into it. So love to hear any specific ideas. You were talking broadly I think there's some complexity around infrastructure development, right? But any specifics that you want to offer that you think are examples that our other states are doing that we could even bring to North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do think you need to address all levels of the market and all users. But as a first principle, I'd say that you have to create the market. And if you create the market, everyone will come and costs will come down. And so, as Jed said, you can create a market by creating an incentive, which creates demand and pull, or you can do it through a stick. I think that both are probably good approaches, but the stick can be a target that is set, that is certain, a ZEV target, for example. California just set a ZEV target for medium and heavy duty. So anything to actually drive adoption of the vehicle itself. And that's what's going to get you to scale and what's going to get costs to come down, right? So people get more experience, you have more volume in developing the vehicles, and that brings costs down. So I think the first thing, and then the whole ecosystem comes. The manufacturing ecosystem comes because people want to be close to their customers. The jobs come and workforce development programs come because there is a large enough, dependable, knowable reason to create a business and an ecosystem. So you need the real market creation policies, and you need to know that they're going to be there for a number of years. You can't just have an incentive that's around for a year or two. It's not enough, right? You need long-standing so that companies have predictability, and you really kind of drive that adoption, which ultimately I think is kind of the first step, is creating that market.
So just a reminder to folks, if you have questions, would love for you to throw those in the chat. Happy to bring those to this team. Richard, I think, and not to create controversy, but sometimes the best panels have a little bit of disagreement, right? So Don brought up this idea of upfront incremental costs, and maybe that's different, but are there other things that you all see or opportunities that you see that are going to drive down some of those, those challenges that might exist around upfront incremental cost differences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that, right now there is going to be this mixed fleet of sort of existing approach and sort of some of these newer sort of technology and vehicle manufacturers like Arrival. And we had a very unique situation where we managed to start from scratch. And so we didn't have any vehicle platforms or legacy designs that we needed to build on top of. We were able to really start from scratch and then build up the vehicle around the electrification system. And that is how we sort of focused and had this sort of relentless drive to how do we reduce the cost and the complexity of all of our vehicles. And that goes into how we are going to manufacture these vehicles as well. And so instead of having a very large multi-million square foot facility, we've developed a concept that we call microfactory, which is down to like the 200,000 square feet. And we'll place these in areas of demand. And this is really only enabled by our very modular build and some of the technologies that we've built. So that, again, this is all about reducing complexity and some of those upfront costs to that. And I think an important area here that I think, whether it's the MOU from the policy side, or even some groups like Electrification Coalition and Series that are really bringing a diverse set of stakeholders and regions together, because North Carolina to South Carolina, definitely compared to Pennsylvania or California, they all have their very unique situations, but they can also learn a lot from each other as well. And then that will be the same through different fleet operators and transit agencies. And so I think facilitating those discussions between everybody so that we can start to understand issues with duty cycles and total cost of ownership, or some of the infrastructure problems that were just discussed, and really start to have a collaborative approach to this topic.
So one of the questions that's come in from the audience, and this is actually for Dawn, but I think others can jump in as well, is what are we going to need to do to require sort of or create widespread consumer awareness? And to that end, do you see that as a positive or a negative in developing markets? The idea that it's not something that's sort of at this point a requirement of building out the industry.
So what are we going to need in terms of education?
Yeah, and I
Is that
think
the
it's
question?
a bit about the idea of you know, that a lot of what companies do doesn't require a lot of consumer awareness, right? So like Volvo Lights project doesn't require a lot of direct consumer awareness, right? But it is this idea of how does that, you know, how is that a negative or a positive in developing the broader market?
Yeah, I guess I don't know why I'm struggling a little bit with the question. I mean, I think that you know, the education is important. You know, there's part of it is maybe a difference from, you know, light duty to heavy duty. I mean, you know, you don't have the same degree. I mean, there needs to be broad education about you know, the electrification of the transportation system. And I should maybe comment here that Volvo Group and Mack Trucks really only operate in the heaviest class sectors of trucks. And so, you know, we do not have Volvo cars or light duty trucks that we offer. And so I think there's less focus on consumer education, but more in terms of some of the other, I think that some of the key educational needs are with fleets and with policymakers and with ports and, you know, other folks in the whole freight movement ecosystem. And I think once there's a greater understanding of how these vehicles work and what you know, what is needed and what they can do and the advantages that they will provide, that then there's that's important to getting greater acceptance. I mean, and this comes to the part of the Volvo Lights project that we have, that, you know, part of that project that's as I mentioned, CARB funded. It's a commercial pilot, and we have a commitment and a responsibility in that project to do as much outreach as we can about that. You know, what's working, what's not, lessons learned, to try and educate about that project as a model for other such projects to go on, not only in the state of California, but across the whole country. And so, you know, again, it's important to have that education out there. And certainly, as was mentioned before, about educating first responders, educating you know, educating folks and at the university level in order to have the workforce training programs. So again, those are, you know, I don't consider that in terms of general education as much as in terms of, you know, stakeholders that are part of this larger ecosystem. I just wanted to go back to one other point that Richard mentioned before, and in terms of you know, the changes in cost. I mean, one of the reasons why I can say that a Volvo, you know, in the Volvo Mack trucks will be more expensive at first is because of the, it's not so much in terms of the, you know, past plans or products, but because of what that means when Volvo brings a product like this to market. I mean, not only is it the product, but it's also, you know, all the work that goes with the sales and service support that is provided. I mean, we have an extensive dealer network around the country that's providing that sales and service support. And there's other technologies that we have that are not directly electrification oriented, but that help in terms of uptime. And so there's a lot of things that we offer with our products that, you know, as an established OEM that's been operating for years, that are incorporated in that cost. So, so anyway, I just wanted to address that too.
Yeah, so maybe, you know, I always think this is an interesting way to phrase the question for infrastructure, is, you know, it's like in a lot of cases, you don't know where chargers are until you own a vehicle, right? It's this funny thing. They're not gas stations. They're not these big branded, you know, things that are on the corner of every major intersection, but instead they can be, you know, you might be parking right next to them. But what kind of things do you think could be helpful in sort of driving more awareness about the availability of infrastructure and frankly, the idea that we need to be continuing to build more?
You know, when you folks have interviewed drivers and done studies about, you know, kind of before and after when they buy a car, an EV, and then once they actually have one, concern about charging and range anxiety is never a concern raised post-purchase. People find that they actually have sufficient places to charge. For the most part, the early adopters have been charging at home or at work. And then, which is for the most part easy. And then there are a host of public charging facilities out there. But again, they're not marked. It's not the conventional gas station experience for most. And I think that it takes some time to kind of break your mindset from that paradigm. It's more like, how do you charge your phone? That's how people charge their car, right? So sometimes, your battery's low on your phone and you plug it in for 20 minutes to get you to the next call that you have or the next Zoom these days. And then you charge up some more. And it's going to be very similar for charging as well. Short of, going on a long distance trip, there are charging stations at shopping malls. There are charging stations at convenience stores. There are charging stations at your workplace. And it's going to be more distributed ultimately, because there is a plug everywhere. So I think that concern about charging quickly goes away. I think there's more education that we need to do upfront, and we certainly need to keep building because adoption is going to continue to go up. And the last thing you want is someone to have a poor charging experience. You need to know that there are sufficient chargers that when they pull up to a station that they're working, which is why, for us, uptime is huge. And that's one of the big reasons people come to ABB is because we are, reliable, and we've been doing electrical infrastructure for 100 years. So, I think we need to make sure that, again, the charging experience is phenomenal, but also I think we need some dose of reality, which is that folks aren't concerned about the range, once they have the vehicle. There is sufficient charging out there.
So we got about 5 minutes left to wrap this up. So we want to do just kind of one last lightning round for folks. So if you can each take a minute, and Jed, I'm going to start with you. Just what's the most important next step for Thomasville in expanding bus electrification, maybe in the state or just across the country?
A couple of things. I think that certainly internally, everybody thinks a school bus is a big yellow box and they're all the same. There's 50 states where everybody has a different legislation, and we're the most heavily regulated transportation in the country. So we have a huge engineering challenge in front of us to hopefully talk some folks out of some complexity, but then manage the complexity we have. So I think that's our internal challenge. I think externally, it's that thing that we've talked about before. It's, how do we change the customer model, the buying model right now away from, and get the players in line to make that happen. So I think for us, that's the two things that really hit me.
Great. I'm excited, as I said, for my 9-year-old to get on the first electric school bus in North Carolina. Maybe my 3-year-old, she'll be next in line, but I think that's an exciting moment. So Richard, why don't I send the same question your direction? So what's the most important thing and step for arrival in North Carolina?
Yeah, great. So yeah, internally for arrival, it's now that we have to deliver. So we've developed what we think is an exciting set of new technologies and products and sort of a world-class team, but we really need to get into and get these technologies into the fleet, into the hands of fleets and agencies, and start to build that trust and reputation, and hopefully to become a leader in this space, because we are a technology-focused company and a startup, so we do have a lot to learn. And yeah, and I think to Dawn's point, yeah, there's a lot of things that go into this world, and so we've got a lot of things to learn and probably a lot of mistakes to make to really get there. Externally focused, I think is for Arrival to really be part of this electrification discussion with states and with localities on these policy areas, to make sure that some of our thoughts and sort of technology solutions are in that discussion, but then also through sort of public-private partnerships for getting sort of pilots and demos out there to start to really change people's opinion of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. And this is one of the areas that we're really putting a lot of effort into, is making sure that we not just we have a relatable story as well. So it's not just an economic cost and sort of the GHG improvements that you get, but also how does this relate to people's lives? So how do we show that electrifying school buses that Jed is working towards, how does that impact and have a positive impact for children and their families? Or how does manufacturing improvements have direct impact to local communities? And then also, how do we make sure that newer services and electrification happens to a broad range of communities? And it's not just in the downtown, like tech commuter line, it's also out into those sort of rural areas. And so I think this will be a key part of this discussion for sort of the state to make sure that we sort of hit that, build that momentum and sort of continue this sort of comprehensive set of discussions and policies.
And I'm going to go next to Dawn so that you're not last, like last time. But the same question, and then Soft, sorry, but you get to figure out how to put yourself in the mix if some ideas haven't been mentioned.
So thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, in terms of, you know, important next steps, I think for us as well as for all of us in this space is to really help to educate ourselves and educate others about what's involved as we go down this path. There is, I guess, the one bit of advice is that, you know, it's so easy to just take a model and run with it. And I think it's really important that since we're talking about North Carolina today, that this dialogue in the state look very specifically at the state and what are the unique challenges and opportunities that the states offer, and not just blindly adopt what other states have done, or to make assumptions on moving forward based on a light duty experience, because there's a lot of differences between light duty and heavy duty. And, you know, I just think back of, you know, I was listening to a Soft's last comment about how there being, you know, there's no range anxiety after you buy a vehicle, and there's a lot more charging infrastructure out there than you'd expect. And I would argue that that's, you know, maybe true on the light duty side, but in terms of heavy duty Class 8, which is where the Volvo Group plays, you know, that's not the case. And so again, it's being mindful that, you know, what has been the case and perspectives from the light duty side don't necessarily translate to the heavy duty side. And the last thing I'll say is that the important next step for us is, and this gets to something I should have raised early on, is that Mack Trucks just announced today that we are beginning production of our electric refuse truck in 2021. And so we need to begin getting that information out there and to people in North Carolina so that we can start seeing the electric Mack refuse trucks running around in our home state and contributing to a better quality of life there.
Well, I think why don't we, Asaf, if you could take it home and just offer your last quick lightning thoughts here. I want to really quickly, as you do that, thank the panel for a really engaging conversation. You know, this is not enough time to dig into this. Medium and heavy duty is a big opportunity, and I think that there's a lot of great thoughts here in buses as well. But Asaf, please.
Yeah, I think, as I said, you know, our focus here, I think, is on soup to nuts, comprehensive policy in the state. I think we've got a good market with the executive order, but we need some real market creation policy now that could take place in the legislature. But there are also other opportunities in front of the commission. You know, Duke Energy put a great proposal together for transportation electrification. It looked at multiple sectors and segments in the market. It'd be great to see the commission move on that, which is another kind of on the table opportunity to create that market for transportation electrification. So again, I'd say that the biggest policy push should be on market creation right now, but we also need that comprehensive approach.
Well, thank you both, not both, thank you all, pardon me, for a great discussion. Jed, Richard, Dawn, and Asaf, it was really great to connect with you all. Look forward to doing it more. And I think, you know, the idea here is how do we turn North Carolina into a national leader and driving that market forward. So looking forward to working with all of you to do that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this section up and move over to our next speaker. And we're very lucky to have Admiral Blair joining us. Former, you know, it's one of those things, your intro is too long for anyone to actually be able to successfully carry, but former Director of National Intelligence, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Command, is currently the chair of Securing America's Future Energy, which is the sister organization of the Electrification Coalition, and also a leading member of the Energy Security Leadership Council. I think in a lot of cases, we talk a lot about some of the benefits of electrification, things like GHG emissions or public health, but love to have your perspective on the national security and economic impacts of our oil dependency and why electrification could be a great solution. So with that, I'll turn it over to Admiral Dennis Blair.
Well, thanks very much, Ben, and it's good to be with this electrification boot camp. And for me, it's no problem that Brita talked on, because I was fascinated by what Duke is doing, and I think it's this sort of combination of both the private sector and the public sector that is necessary to get us to an electrified transportation system, both in vehicles, buses, and many other areas. What I'd like to talk a little bit about is why I became interested in this issue of electrification, because I came at it from probably a slightly different angle from most of you all who are participating in this boot camp. And my career has been entirely in national security. I was in the Navy for 35 years, ended up commanding our forces in the Pacific, and then I was the director of national intelligence when we were looking at sort of what was going on in the world overall. And what I saw is that if I had one magic wand to wave during my time as a senior military commander and an official, it would have been to get the U.S. transportation sector off of oil. This 92% dependence of our transportation sector on oil has caused the United States to take actions and to secure our national security future, which are against all sorts of other things that we think are important. It's forced us to deal. I think I have to believe that if there is a God, she has a sense of humor, because she put these oil deposits, all of these ferns and dinosaurs and all died in places that are now extremely unstable parts of the world, and places that are often hostile to American interests and the way we think about things. Saudi Arabia, parts of Western Africa, Russia, and all of these countries who are big suppliers in the world oil supply are not the countries that the United States has much in common with. And yet, because that's where the oil comes from, we not only have to deal with these countries in a different way, a lot more support for what they want to do, pulling our punches on some things that are important to us in terms of our values and other national security interests. But we also have to we provide the security of the sea lane so that the oil can get from these distant places to the rest of the world markets. And it's put a huge burden on our armed forces. And what really bothered me about it was that there was something we could do in this country to fix that. We didn't have to send our troops over to Afghanistan and Iraq and places at the bottom of which lay our oil dependence in transportation sector. We did not have to deal with taking action against Russia, except for the oil sector, which was so important to the world economy, which is what we did. So this dependence on oil deformed our entire national security policy, has cost us trillions of dollars, and it's really a hidden cost on top of what we pay at the pump, and it's a cost to our national security. When I started with the Energy Security Leadership Coalition, it was before the fracking revolution, and it made the United States the world's biggest oil producer. And at first we thought that, boy, that would take care of the problem. With the United States being the biggest oil producer, we would be able to regain control of our oil destiny. But we don't. Why? Because oil is an international market. The price is set by international supply and demand, no matter how much the United States produces. And so the actions of individual countries, when there's geopolitical turmoil in the Middle East, when there's a natural disaster, even though the United States is producing 12 million gallons per day, the price goes up for American consumers, for American businesses, and the United States still has to remain vitally concerned with what's happened in these other oil producing areas of the world. And we deploy our forces and we deploy our diplomacy and we try to keep things try to keep things moving. And we've seen as recently as a couple of years ago when President Trump has had to go to Saudi Arabia to talk to them about oil prices and not really push the issues that we need to push. So I guess why I wanted a chance to talk to these electrification boot camps is because what you all are doing in terms of taking the measures to make sure that we knock down those barriers to the adoption of electric vehicles, that we have policies that encourage their encouragement, is not only good for the environment and, as Britta pointed out, good for the pocketbook in many cases, but it's good for the country's national security. If we can get our electric fleet up to 50, 60% of the cars on the road, it will make an enormous difference in the way the United States can act in accordance with its true national security interests and cut down the amount of military force we have to deploy to keep stability in regions of the world that are swing oil producers like the Middle East. It will cut down on the way that we have to use the kid gloves with some countries that we otherwise ought to be putting pressure on because of other American interests, and all of those things. So when you think about putting more electrical cars on the road, think not only about how much carbon and greenhouse gases are being removed from the atmosphere, but think about how you're helping make the United States a stronger place so that succeeding generations will not have to take the sort of actions that we have had to take in the past because of this dependence on oil in the transportation sector. So, I drive a Bolt, and I figure that's a key national security decision as well as an important personal environmental decision. I think we ought to think of it all in those terms. So, Ben, I certainly applaud the efforts of the Electrification Coalition and all of the partners that you drew together in North Carolina to work on this, and the similar work you're doing in other states. And I think, frankly, that some of our federal policies are behind where many of the local and state efforts are. And in a big democracy like the United States, if we can put pressure coming up from the bottom, if we can have an active private sector, if we can have state, local governments who are doing the right thing because it makes sense from their point of view, as well as their being patriots, I think we can push this country in the right direction and make it not only a country that has reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, has reduced the pollutants in the atmosphere, is using less energy overall, but is making a more secure country for our children and for successive generations. So wonderful to be with you, and best of luck for another successful boot camp.
Well, always a pleasure to have you. Maybe one question, just as we get ready to move on to the last thing, or the next thing rather. Why don't you think more people are kind of latching on to the economic and national security arguments associated with transportation electrification? Why is this such a hard thing for people to sort of understand or connect to?
I think that the main reason for that is the sort of short-term nature of not only some individuals thinking, but also, frankly, some government thinking. And if the price of oil has been down for what, a couple of years now, and it costs you less to fill your tank than it did before, so you think, why should I deal with range anxiety? Why should I pay the extra premium for an electric vehicle when I can fill up my tank for $2 a gallon? So I think that's taken some of the wind out of it. I think another piece of it is probably the pretty strong vested interests of the gasoline parts of the gasoline engine parts of the economy. I know when I bought my Bolt in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area, I had to look around to find a dealer who had an electric vehicle. Many of those ones that Brita showed on her picture from Norway are not available here. I finally found a dealer that the dealer was not terribly happy to sell that car. So I think we have some people who are invested in the current system. I think we had the low price of oil, and I think the stronger, when we had these immediate shocks in oil spikes, then the national security arguments were pretty obvious. Now, the last couple of years of low oil prices, people have thought, we're okay. But we know from all the analysis we do that those are temporary, that there are going to be oil spikes in the future. And if the United States is 92% dependent on it, they're going to hurt the country in the future as they did in the past.
Well, with that, I thank you for your commentary and your service. Obviously, you and I can head down to Hendricks, and he's one of the largest dealership owners in the country, right here in North Carolina, which may or may not have been where you purchased yours. But I think maybe it's time to sit down and see if we can't get him more invested in having more EVs on the lot. So thank you as always, and look forward to connecting more. At this point, I'm going to switch over to our next speaker. So thank you, Admiral Blair, for joining us once again. But if I may, we're going to invite Joel or Joel Espino, and sorry, Joel. Apparently my linguistic capabilities are poor today, but Joel comes to us from WEN Collective. He has spent a number of years, and he and I have actually had a bunch of opportunities to work together, but to focus on how do we start to think about transportation equity and the opportunities that transportation electrification has in developing a more just and equitable transportation system. With that, Joel, if I may, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell people a little bit more about the background and why transportation has such an equity component to it.
Yes, great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
And slide is showing up, just making sure.
It is.
Okay, great. Hi all, thanks Ben. Yeah, and just thanks to the Electrification Coalition folks for the invitation to speak. And yeah, just greatly appreciate that this topic is on the agenda for this boot camp. As Ben said, my name is Joel Espino. I'm with the WEN Collective. And I'll be talking about the intersection of equity and transportation electrification, and why those two things coming together, are critical for not only progress on climate, but obviously progress on society as well. And I'll share kind of a concrete frame for what that looks like, and some examples for, how to make your EV work a little more equitable, right? And give us a place to start. And so with that, let's get into it here. And so when I'm asked to speak on this topic, I always start with identifying the problem. I'm sure we've all heard the term systemic racism more often these days, given the current national consciousness, right, on police brutality and the focus on anti-Black racism. And that's really where we have to start, right, to get a good sense of systemic oppression in this country and how it shows up in our society in general, but what that looks like in our transportation system in particular. Who gets to enjoy the benefits of transportation the most, right? Who's hit hardest by the bad stuff of transportation, like pollution, highways, congestion, limited mobility? Unpacking this stuff is where we have to start if we're going to be successful in advancing equity. So I'll start with a concrete example of what this looks like and how it shows up. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the term redlining or have seen maps kind of like the one that you see on the screen. And then, you know, the term redlining dates back to the New Deal era. One of the ways Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to address the economic pain inflicted by the Great Depression was to help struggling families who lost their homes and wealth by issuing affordable government-backed mortgages. And so what the government did was to create these maps across major metros in the US. And many times they did that in partnership with realtors to figure out, you know, where to target the benefits of this new program. And the way that it worked was, you know, areas that were lined with red were essentially, you know, deemed quote unquote hazardous, right? They were considered too risky for lending money to that part of the city. And what we know now is that the primary indicator of whether an area was redlined was race, right? And basically, if you were a Black or brown community, you were redlined and effectively, you know, locked out of this program systematically. And, you know, what we know now from historians and economists and what they tell us is that this practice played a major role, right, in creating intergenerational poverty. And so when we zoom out, right, and we add up all this long history, of which redlining is just one example, what we get are, you know, these deep structures of inequality that, you know, are just kind of baked in, right, into all of our systems in society: social, political, economic, built environment. And so what ends up happening is that we get race and class disparities, right, across any indicator of well-being. We end up with things like environmental injustice, right, where Black and brown communities are hit first and worst by transportation pollution, as indicated by this data on this slide. This is data from North Carolina in terms of air pollution exposure. We end up with things like economic injustice, right, where currently the US is facing a growing racial wealth gap, and that, you know, is currently being exacerbated by the pandemic, right? The data there on the slide is from 2015, and it shows that for every dollar a white family had, a Latino family had 10 cents and a Black family had 8 cents. And so, you know, what the heck does all this have to do with transportation and electrification, right? Well, you know, I like to start with laying this foundation because it's core to, you know, equity focused work, right? And I think it's particularly important for this audience. I know that I, as a racial justice advocate, I see every policy on transportation electrification, every program, every budget as an opportunity to break the cycle of inequality that we just unpacked a little bit, right? By leveraging the good stuff we know, you know, is inherent in EV technology and EV policy, you know, like clean air, like cost savings, like jobs and business opportunities. And so, you know, I invite you all to think about how, you know, think about EV policy in this way. And here's a little bit of a starting point of what that might look like. Because we're dealing with a multi-issue problem, we need to have some specific things in mind, right? In terms of, like, you know, design principles, if you will, or a frame to make sure we're advancing equity. And so if your EV effort has an aim to be equitable, here's 5 things to consider. You should be directly addressing past harm, right? And so basically what that means is equitable distribution of benefits, right? Meaning that those people who are hit hardest in communities that are hit hardest should get the most benefits. And, you know, the second thing is that, you know, those closest to the pain are closest to the solution, right? Meaning that your EV effort should be community driven, right? And advance kind of a participatory governance model, so that we're working to shift the usual kind of power dynamics that we see in policy making to be more bottoms up instead of top down, to ensure that, you know, actual mobility needs on the ground and priorities in community are being met. The third thing is that whatever EV effort you're contemplating, whether it's a policy, whether it's a project, whether it's a plan, it should be intersectional in design, meaning that we have to look to create multiple benefits, right? This means we don't just, stop at just making sure that we reduce pollution and emissions to address, the environmental injustice piece of this, but we also work to make getting around easier, right? Make it cheaper, make it healthier, and make it safer, particularly for people of color, to address some of the transportation injustice that these communities face. And we should also work to address economic injustice, right? Through economic inclusion practices. And this means, connecting high quality jobs that are being generated in this work to poor folks and folks of color that need jobs, right? And that we're doing what needs to be done to set things in place so that they get trained and hired for these opportunities. And also that, businesses of color get to enjoy any of the contract opportunities that come from some of these multi-million-dollar projects, right? To address and break up the old boys network that we know exists and is part of government contracts and businesses. And number 4, making sure that government and decision-making tables are representative, right? And that they are diverse and that they're equitable and inclusive in their values. And so that becomes not part of just the lens that, these decisions are made through, but it becomes part of the culture of these institutions of power. And then the last piece, right? We know that equity many times is a disruptor, and many times we're trailblazing when we're trying new approaches with an equity lens. And so we have to build into our strategies and projects mechanisms to learn, right? To learn, to be responsive to real world application, and to be committed to, adapt our approaches and designs on the fly sometimes. And so that's a little bit of a frame of how you might, have an equitable approach to your EV effort. And so these next few slides, I'll share some examples of what that looks like. In 2014, a coalition of mainstream enviros and environmental justice and equity groups came together to sponsor and help pass this piece of legislation called the Charter California Initiative. And essentially what it did was it directed the state through the Air Resources Board to increase access to electric vehicles for low-income communities and communities of color. And so that meant figuring out how do we overcome, these multiple barriers that we know are part of EV policy in these communities. And so one example that came out of that in terms of a project design was this Clean Cars for All model, which was basically, a scrap and replace program. And essentially if, you had to be income qualified, you had to be low, moderate income, you had to have a clunker, and, that clunker was scrapped. It was, they got that car off the road, and you were given a voucher of up to $9,500 for a new or used EV. And part of the program too helped cover costs up to $1,500 for a charger as well. So that's one program design that's been put out there in terms of an equity project. Another different model is kind of an electric car sharing at affordable housing. And this project basically provided electric car sharing for folks who were part of affordable housing complexes in multiple cities, but it also provided a mobility hub of other options as well. And what's really interesting about this project was that obviously it was a community-driven project, and there was kind of a youth development component and economic development component to this as well, because folks were hired from the housing complex to survey residents about what other mobility needs they might need, so to make sure that they're providing other options like transit passes or bike share memberships, for example. So that was a really interesting model there. And then the last example I'll share here before getting into some questions is there's this electric rural car share model where basically we have, a rural farm worker community that where retired farm workers were basically just giving rides to folks in the community, to their immigrations appointments, to their doctor's appointments, which, they had to travel to the nearest major city, which was an hour away. And many of these folks didn't have cars. And so there was already an informal network of kind of ride sharing. And basically what the mayor of Huron, who you see here on the far left of your screen, Ray Leon, he basically found some funding and formalized this project to make sure that that project was using electric vehicles, and that the farm workers were getting paid because they were working on kind of a donation basis previously. And I think the other kind of, in terms of multiple benefits, the multiple benefits angle, what they also did was they created a community center, right, where kind of the dispatchers would work out of and where the cars would be housed, but it provided a community space for the community, right, to kind of provide some resiliency within community in terms of even just providing a space for folks to cool down if they needed. And so these are a few examples. I know I went through them quickly, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of taste of what it might look like in terms of a project with an equity lens in terms of an EV project. So I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Great. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you join the conversation. And I think, everybody's learning a lot about how to think about transportation equity. Equity is a conversation that's happening nationally right now in a very significant way, an important way. But, I think sometimes it's not clear always how that translates to something like transportation. So I want to just flag for folks, we're jumping into lunchtime. So maybe we'll do this as if anybody has questions they want to add into the chat really quickly, go for it. But in this case, feel free to start thinking about what you're going to grab for lunch, et cetera. But I'll just ask one question and then we'll see if there's any others that pop up. And at that point, we can let everybody jump to lunch. So, I guess one of the challenges that I always think exists is there are so many barriers that exist for the equity space period, right? And it's not just specific to transportation. And so I think it's also something where these conversations are really hard, right? Like language is hard. It's hard to understand what the right words are to use. It's hard to understand how to focus. But I think, I'm always profoundly impacted by the idea that it is about the idea of creating this, and you're doing this work right now, but and this is a very long-winded question, so apology.
No,
but
good.
You're working to help develop a sort of a communities of practice exercise, right? And this idea that we need to build this table in a much more effective way that includes more voices, and especially the voices that are affected. So as people are thinking about policy efforts in North Carolina, what kind of, and I know you just shared some examples, but what are some early and first stage steps that can really help make sure that the right people are at the table at the beginning?
Yeah, I think I'll answer your question by saying, and I think what you're getting to is, in many ways, when you're bringing an equity approach to the EV work, right, we're essentially trying to address capacity gaps, right? There's a specific set of skill set, there's a specific way of doing this work that we just doesn't naturally exist within the EV policy space and the practitioners there. And so really what it comes down to is you have to bring in those skills into the work, right? You have to, kind of take off our EV wonk hats off a little bit there and think more in terms of community development and what are the skills that kind of approach entails, right? That's a more kind of community focused approach. It requires relationship with community. It requires facilitating relationships between community leaders of impacted communities and decision makers and policy advocates. And so really one of the first things that should happen is really tapping into some of those intermediaries ideally, right, within each state, within each context, that have visibility into kind of the policy space, but also have a connection to community groups and really leverage those groups and really resource them, right? A lot of the times these organizations are strapped for capacity themselves. And so we need to make sure that community facing groups have the resources they need to actually engage on EV policy, right? Because if that doesn't happen, what usually ends up happening is people have well intentions around equity and stuff, but what we end up getting with, unfortunately, is token action, right? And stuff that is actually not translating to the benefits that we want to see in the impacted communities. And so ultimately, it's about building a strong infrastructure across the board and getting the right players, the right skills, the right people we need into this work and into this movement. And so that's kind of where I would start. Yeah, hope that was helpful. I think you're on mute, Ben.
Somebody recently said we need to make a shirt for that, and it's true. It's like you can play Zoom bingo. Well, there were a couple questions that came up in the chat, but I want to make sure we give people a couple minutes to step away from the computer and their screen, grab some food, and then circle back. So, well, I know that there's an opportunity for us to follow up with you and maybe share some of these questions and cycle back. I really appreciate your bringing some of this to the conversation. And I think it's really important in North Carolina to think about how do we build equity into some of the policy solutions that we're thinking about. But with that, I'm gonna again thank you for joining us, and we're gonna turn over to lunch right now. So we'll have some music come on. People should grab some food, and we will start back up at 1:30. I know that's not very much time. It's apologies. We've run over a little bit, but please come back at 1:30 and we'll start back up with our next session. And again, thanks, Joel.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of that musical interlude and are ready to sink back in to talking a little bit more about EVs. We're going to take a turn to the west to start us off a little bit. As we talked with folks across North Carolina, they were really eager to hear about how other things are going in other states. And one of the states that jumped out as one of interest is Colorado. And so we're delighted to bring to you a little bit of Colorado here today in North Carolina. We know the Rockies are a little different than the Blue Ridge, but there's some interesting similarities between the context for Colorado and the context for North Carolina. Some really interesting approaches they've taken with the light duty sector, and they too are a signatory to the medium duty, heavy duty MOU, and also have a great leader in their DOT. So with that, please introduce Shoshana Liu. She's the executive director of the Colorado Department of Transportation, and we asked her here today to just share a little bit more about their experience and hopefully provide some inspiration to you. So thank you, Shoshana.
Hi, can everybody hear and see me okay?
Sounds good.
All right, it's a point for Zoom world working. So thanks so much for the opportunity to chat a little bit with y'all today. It's always really exciting to have the chance to kind of compare notes with other states who are on their EV trajectories as we are, and really delighted to be able to talk a little bit about our experience, what we've learned, the challenges we've come across, how we're sort of dealing with challenges, and to honestly start a dialogue in hopes that we can find some opportunities to keep this conversation going and talk together as we both move forward with this big shift that we're all going through. I lost the slides, just FYI. Are they still up? Because I can no longer see the slide presentation. Yeah, all good. Nope.
Coming up shortly.
Coming up. Okay. Well, so, just at the outset, I think we're at a really interesting moment in our sort of journey towards electrification. I've been working on this subject, for a really long time. Worked in the federal government for many years on fuel efficiency programs, and now for a number of years at the state level. And it feels to me like this dialogue is in a really different place than it was even 3 or 5 years ago, right? There was the conversation half a decade ago was if, and now the conversation's when. And I find that to be very evident, in a lot of different things, including, the products that we're seeing coming off the line from industry, the way that different stakeholders are approaching these discussions we're having at the state level, about policies like ZEV. And the urgency of making it happen so that we're not sort of stuck in this limbo place forever where it's, we're not quite at that tipping point, but we know we're headed there. Next slide, please. So, the other piece, just to sort of start with the problem statement that we're solving for before we talk a little bit about sort of the economic opportunity, transportation is growing as part of the problem from the environmental perspective, right? It was, utilities used to be the #1 source of emissions. Collectively, we in the transportation sector have made our way to #1, not for good reasons in this case. And, I think that there's several sort of phenomena to unpack in that. One is that the progress towards clean energy in the utility sector, has moved faster than in transportation. And, one of the things that I think is taking off in the utility sector is that it's moving to the point where the economics of it are starting to work better, right? Clean energy has become much, much cheaper in the last years. And, something we're seeing in Colorado, which, my colleagues in the energy office and elsewhere have spent a great deal of time working on, is that the utilities themselves are making major commitments to widespread clean power, not in the next 20 years, but in the next 5 and 10 years. We see announcements about transitions of coal plants. It's just something that seems to be a ball that's rolling on its own, with policies doing it, but, much more, with much more momentum than, I think, frankly, I would have guessed it would 10 years ago. What that also means, in addition to the transportation ratio going up, is that the opportunity for cleaner transportation, if we can hook it up to the electrical grid rather than to gasoline, is much greater than it was when we were talking about a dirtier utility sector, right? The benefits of electrification are, much more substantial if it's drawing from clean power than conventional. So, as the power sector becomes a cleaner source of energy and a more, reliably clean source of energy, the opportunity to achieve economies of scale and clean transportation by switching to electrification grows rapidly. And it's not, it's not a linear trajectory, it's one that's really exponential. Next slide, please. So consumer choice, there are a few different things that have to sort of converge in order for electrification to work, right? One of them is that the policies and the market have to be there, and the ZEV policies that I know you're considering it, and that we adopted the regulation last year. It deals on the supply side because it's focused on manufacturers and on making the cars available. Well, people still have to buy them, and this is a point that you'll hear from the industry at some length, and candidly, they're right. That in addition to the supply being available, it has to be something that is sort of normal enough that you don't have to be a true believer to go out and buy it, right? Like the 3-minute mark left, or 3-minute, sorry. Sue, can you just give me a sense of how much time we have? Okay.
Yeah, you bet. Sorry, you've got about 3 or 4 more minutes would be great, but keep going.
Okay. So let me pivot. Actually, rather than going through all of the slides, I'm just going to kind of focus on a couple of points that I think are important to have in the ether as you start to think through this. I think first and foremost, figuring out who the players are who have to work together to make this work, is extraordinarily important. And it's not just the usual suspects. And I heard that your transportation department, like ours, is playing a lead role, and that's, extraordinary in terms of, in terms of impact, because the transportation departments know how to build things, right? We are agencies of doers, and as we move from it being just sort of a regulatory conversation to one about implementation, it's really important to have the kind of network of people who work in the transportation space involved. So, I was really encouraged to hear that about your team. It's something that's worked really well for our team. And, I think that sort of thinking through the practical implications and also how the infrastructure conversation around roads connects with the infrastructure conversation around charging is something that needs to make a lot of progress really fast. So that's a big deal. I think I would just also touch on the fact that one of the things that has made our approach here unique and frankly doable in a state that has, pretty mixed opinions on a lot of this stuff is that we've had a very open line of communication with the manufacturers that resulted in Colorado being the first state in the country to do a ZEV standard with the support of the industry. That was a big deal for us, both because practically it means we have a line of communication with them about getting the cars here, but also, we faced quite a bit of opposition at the beginning. And particularly there was a coalition with our dealers and many others who were actively opposing it. So being able to do this in a way where we could talk about it being part of an economic conversation was, I think, very important to our being able to do it. So, I think thinking about the opportunities to build these coalitions now that the market is farther along than it was, 5, 10, 20 years ago is something that, has served us well. And, I would just sort of recommend as part of the dialogue. And it sounds like we're at the end of our time, so I am going to stop there rather than go through the other slides. Do we have time for questions?
Thank you. Now that was really great, Shoshana, and I think it's especially heartening to kind of hear someone who's gone through it for a while, and North Carolina has been, of course, I think, pacing themselves and moving along as well. And you weren't on for the earlier presentation we had from the North Carolina DOT, but lots of stuff they're putting in place, lots of motivation there. So if I could just, have you close out with a question and see if there's anything coming in through the chat. I was curious if you could share a little bit more about how you have or how you did build and are continuing to build those relationships with the industry, and maybe a little bit of how you see that playing out as you move into the medium duty, heavy duty space. I know there's different manufacturers. Sometimes, it spans a little bit of a different set, but there's definitely some overlap there. So just, any kind of tips on how that happened?
Sure. So a few things, and some of them having to do with the moment we're in, and some of them having to do with, how you approach it. I think fundamentally it is a different moment. I made the point about it being a question of when, not if. The manufacturers know that, right? I mean, you look at the announcements that have been made by every OEM of consequence, and every single one of them is looking at moving their future supply towards electrification. So, the sunk costs at this point are tremendous. And, the interest in figuring out how to get there, I think, is at a different level of urgency for them than it was several years back. So, they're looking to partner, with the sort of practical players in order to make this subset of the market work, in a way which honestly was not the case some time ago, when it was more of an open question whether it was happening. So, there's kind of fertile ground for these partnerships to happen because of where the market is at this point, distinct from the past. Our approach, we reached out to them very early on. It sounds really obvious that, reaching out and saying we want to talk is something that has to happen at the beginning, but honestly, it doesn't always happen. So, we reached out, at the very beginning of the governor's term and before we, put out the first executive order. And, we just said, like, we want to have an open line of communication, and we'd rather do this with you than against you. And, I think the human side of things has a tendency to work in all of these spaces. And, just to pivot to the trucking conversation, it's very much the same there. I mean, and candidly, I don't know if we're going to get there on everything with trucking, because there's in some ways deeper differences of opinion on some of the trucking issues, but just the fact of reaching out and sharing ideas and hearing each other out respectfully has made a huge difference in the tone of it. So, even if it doesn't ultimately work on getting consensus on everything, having it be something where it's like people talking to each other, with some shared goals, some differences of equities, and an ability to just kind of talk calmly about where you agree and where you disagree, is not to be understated in terms of utility for the process. So, that may be kind of basic, but I think that, because some of these issues are so heated right now, that's time's getting lost, and, it's worth returning to base principles on that score.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that idea of communication is fantastic. We just had a collection of medium duty and heavy duty manufacturers actually as part of our fireside chat, and you know, not everybody was on the same page, but I think having that dialogue and having that conversation definitely something that obviously served you all well, and certainly can serve North Carolina well. So thank you for sharing all that, and we'll have your slides up on the website for everyone, as we noted earlier, and we really appreciate your insights and look forward to staying in touch as you and North Carolina are kind of linked together through this MOU process. So appreciate your insights and look forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely. And, you know, we're always happy to be a resource for our peer states and to learn from what you're doing. So, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to, you know, me, my team, and our colleagues.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you also for providing a lead in to our next segment, where we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on some of the policy ideas that we've been looking at for North Carolina across all sectors, light duty and medium duty and heavy duty. This is a very quick run through of what we're calling our EV policy blueprint for action. And so it's some high level overviews, touching on some of the things that people have brought up already in terms of where they see opportunities, the word cloud that we all helped build together earlier today. So I'm going to start off the session and do a quick overview of the ideas we've put together. Definitely want to give credit to a lot of folks we've talked to along the way. Want to give credit to folks that have been working in this space already and providing a lot of ideas into, you know, the broader policy arena, if you will. Definitely drew upon those as well. And then after I, you know, go through some of our ideas, we want to hear from all of you. So this is going to be a super fun thing. It's called the Fishbowl. And you'll catch on to it, I think, soon enough. But it's the idea that we'll bring folks in and have you all give a chance to speak with Aaron Biles of our team, who's going to be moderating the session. Got a few questions we'll go through, but it's really just a chance to hop on and share what you're thinking and share your ideas and reactions. So if that sounds like something that is fun to you, I want to ask you to go ahead and put your name in the queue. We've got 4 great folks from North Carolina already lined up to get the conversation going, but love to have more to pull into that session. So for that, you need to direct chat. So go to a little chat box and pull down EC Tech. That's our friend Annie on the other end. It is a person. And she will get you in the queue for that. So just a little plug for that. And I'm going to go ahead and start these slides and walk you through the draft ideas that we have in our EC policy blueprint for action for North Carolina. So let me click on that. All right. So I think this is a highway anywhere, probably not North Carolina, but just like they had in Norway, I'm hoping that one day in North Carolina, we can just make circles around all the EVs, right? That we see on the roads there. And you know, we're happy to kind of present some of these ideas here that we have for making that a possibility. A little bit of a backdrop here is aligning with the goals that many have mentioned around CO2 emissions, and really just driving home the point, which you should be able to see here in these 2 kind of illustrations, is that there is a way forward to be able to turn over the fleet, if you will, flip the fleet to electric, you know, this has a timeline over the next 40 years, and reduce a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions. To do that type of transformation means that, you know, we need to dramatically ramp up the sales. I know folks are working hard on that. There's some great midterm goals, but we're excited to think about how we can move that even faster. And as we see more models come online, we heard mention of some things even today that the Mack truck announcement, more and more, and the year 2021, 2022, 2023, they're standing out as some great years for a lot of great new models. So we're optimistic about that making a big impact and being a way forward for a lot of folks to move into an EV. So we took a look at a whole range of policy options, and we bucketed them into 5 different sections. So you'll see them here: light duty vehicles, freight, transit buses, although alongside school buses as well, as we heard mention of that, charging infrastructure and rates, which kind of crosses all of those sectors, but is somewhat of a distinct area. And then also what we are calling equitable EV fees, to make the distinction that there's a level beyond which starts to be inequitable. So those are 5 policy buckets. I'm going to just walk through them. As noted previously, we will have all these slides available. So as you wish to go through and look at things in a little more detail on your own, welcome you doing that, getting us feedback and comment on those as well. So light duty vehicles, a little bit on the context. This was presented a little bit earlier. About 6 million light duty vehicles in North Carolina. Okay on model availability. You heard the Admiral talk about a little bit of challenge of getting the vehicle that he wanted. I'm not sure how long ago that was, but it's okay, but still limited. And a great, but somewhat ambitious goal out there to move the state to 80,000 EVs by 2025. So a little bit of some of what's going on already, and some ideas about how we can work together to move forward. So what I'm going to be doing is presenting like a whole range and menu of options. I'll speak to a few things that we think are more promising than others in terms of the near term, but really trying to set out really a whole menu of option that many folks are working towards. With state and public fleets, really trying to encourage and support that fleet acquisition effort. Jeremy Tarr spoke to the ZEV fleet plan that's been developed for North Carolina, and the opportunity to use what we would call an EV first procurement policy and really enable the full use of that. I know they're really working towards getting the infrastructure to match up with the vehicles that they're looking to bring in there. Some definite opportunities there, opportunities to look at some innovative financing options. And I'd say moreover, or in particular, provide more education and training for both decision makers and for drivers. That's really a critical part for helping move things forward. We've seen that at the local level and the fleets that we've helped electrify in cities across the country. And it's the full set of full suite of options that need to come forward, but a few ideas there. And then on the consumer level, really need to expand EV access and awareness. So that's both getting more cars available and into North Carolina for folks to buy. A couple different ways to do that, certainly through the option of setting specific sales targets, opening up the market alongside dealer franchises, and being able to allow manufacturers to sell directly to consumers. That's something a few states have done, actually including Colorado most recently this year. And the notion of direct access is to complement what's going on already at the dealer level, and allow, in the case of Colorado and the other 4 or 5 states that have done this, those companies that manufacture only EV to go forward with that. Ooh, got a good track there going. And then, as we've said before, incentives are really a great motivator. Budgets being what they are, appreciate that it's a tough time to talk about monetary incentives, but certainly worth looking at where those can be developed, and where some of those non-monetary incentives can be developed as well. And then again, on the education theme, real opportunity to provide consumer-facing education. Right now, the ride and drive opportunities are more limited, but we know our friends at Plug and NC and elsewhere are doing virtual ride and drives. So still a chance to kind of experience things, even if it's virtual for the near term. Freight's another great opportunity. I think that's come up quite frequently throughout the course of the day. I know we're really excited about it. These are some of the stats that kind of lay out the vehicle and situation, and then also nod to the MOU that's really just starting. That's a process that will unfold over the next year or so, and the opportunity to work together in that 15-state cohort, and other states might be joining as well, but an opportunity to work together to think through solutions. And we're excited to have both North Carolina and then another state we're working closely with, Pennsylvania, be part of that group. So some great opportunities to do some learning across that as well. So what about the policies that can come into play? So the MOU sets a goal of getting to zero emission vehicles in the freight sector. But I'd say just as we've seen in the light duty sector, and I think this is one place where there is a corollary, it's about combining those goals and targets with the supporting policies that can help folks actually move towards them. So we've got a list here. It's kind of an excerpt from a longer list and a white paper we'll be putting out shortly on this topic. But there's a real mix of financial incentives, of different financing models, again, education, and then a whole host of utility related programs, both in terms of things like demand charges and time of use rates that are really going to be critical for that freight electrification to move forward. And then on the right side there, you'll see the need here too for infrastructure support, the notion of setting some requirements to move the market, and then the opportunity within the public fleet as well. There's actually a fair number of medium and heavy duty vehicles within the public sector that can help be that kind of tip of the spear to move things forward on the medium and heavy duty front. So we're also excited about the opportunity for transit and school buses. We heard a little bit about this again in the fireside chat. You know, these are big, expensive things to have a transit agency or a school take on, but they really prove themselves out over time with the savings from fuel and savings from really, you know, much lower costs for operation and maintenance. There's been some progress made in North Carolina with both some of the federal funding that comes through the federal low-no funding buses for transit, or funding for transit buses, and then also as Sushma was speaking to, this first tranche of VW settlement funds that North Carolina released includes some funding for transit and school buses that are electric. So it's not that full 16.57. But some portion of that's going to go towards e-buses. So that just means there's a lot more that can be done in the state. We've got sort of this foursquare here of the different kind of levers that that might be activated, from setting goals to attempting to reduce the capital burden. That first time cost that's can be really challenging, and thinking about different financing options. Updating procurement opportunities, or sorry, updating procurement procedures. A lot of the rules and processes that have been put in place are, you know, are not designed for electric vehicles, or they weren't, you know, weren't put in place with EVs in mind. That doesn't mean they can't work, but there's an opportunity there to think about changes some of the specifications, or maybe some of the ways that those procurements are approached. And we know that there's some discussions going on right now in North Carolina around some of the transit bus acquisitions. And then again, back to incentives. VW settlement funding, as those second and third tranches of funding come forward, really excited to have those go more and more towards transit and school buses. And then the opportunity, as we heard from Duke and others, to think about how utility funding and partnerships can help support this area as well. Infrastructure and rates, that does, as I say, cross many different sectors here, and kind of undergird the vehicle movement as well. You've got some progress made on the level 2 chargers and the DC fast chargers in North Carolina. Again, still a ways to go. Even though most charging now happens at home at work, about 80%. Still important to have these publicly available chargers in place to help folks get to where they need to go, reduce some of the range anxiety. And you'll see here just a quick summary of what Duke has put on the table. That proposal is still pending, so yet to be resolved, but you know, has some pretty ambitious numbers in there to move forward with. So alongside those, there's a suite of opportunities, both in the building sector, the opportunity for enhancing statewide EV building codes to make them what we call EV ready, so that those can be buildings and structures can be built in a way that makes it a lot easier on the front end to absorb those costs than have to retrofit them. A host of rate design issues that I mentioned already, and then another suite of utility related programs that speak specifically to infrastructure investments and ways to get more infrastructure to support EVs. And I'll close with equitable EV fees. Today, North Carolina does have in place a fee on electric vehicles of $130 per year. As folks can probably appreciate, that was put in place with the concern to address the loss of gas tax revenue. That gas tax revenue is a main source of support for North Carolina transportation infrastructure. The context here is that EVs, as you all know, and we've been saying, are still quite a small part of the fleet. So it's the impact of inflation and the growing efficiency of course cars overall have really had a much greater impact on those gas tax revenues than others, and that added fee makes it harder for EV adoption goals to be met. So what we're looking ahead in the coming years is, as proposals come forward, as we're expecting them to potentially increase this fee, is to think about how do we keep these equitable. Right now, according to some of the studies we've looked at, this amount, as it's currently set, is about equitable to what a gas-fired vehicle would pay the equivalent of. So really want to keep our eyes on that and avoid having to create a deterrent to EV adoption. Wow, I feel like the time has flown by, which I think that means we've been having fun. At least I have. And yeah, thanks again to the Fishbowl swimmers. Great stuff, and a way to kind of charge us up after a great day. So I've got the honor of closing us out. I've got a few things to share and some next steps. So hope you can hang with us for the next few minutes. I'm going to start with our version of the 3-minute Shakespeare. I don't know if you've ever been to these shows where they do a play in 3 minutes. This may not be Shakespeare, but we had a lot of good dialogue at the EV Bootcamp, and I'm going to give you a recap in 3 minutes. Thanks to Adam Snyder, our comms guy, who was closely listening to the speakers. I'm going to play for you just a little recap of some of the great moments that we had going on. All right, so I think this is an order of speaker. Going to start at the top. Some great wisdom and encouragement from Governor Cooper in sort of imploring us to use our expertise to continue this momentum. I think we're all happy to take up that charge, excited to have him in that leadership role. We then got to hear from some of the kind of the foot soldiers, if you will, in the administration, from Sushma, who gave us some great updates on where things are going on quite a few fronts through the work of the DEQ, and then from Kevin Lacey at the DOT, recognizing that it's a multi-agency effort here, really driving home the great opportunities. I was really excited to hear how positive and supportive he was of EVs and laying out the many different benefits that EVs bring. Got to hear from Sean on an array of economic development opportunities in North Carolina directly, proving out that this notion of jobs are at the end of the EV rainbow, if you will. Great to see and hear about what's going on there and some of the forward thinking that's going on in Siemens. Representative Zoka, I love this, like, just, here's what you need to do. Get to the legislators and just remind them consumers want these EVs. And I think we had a good discussion about like just appreciating what that means and getting folks to know how great these vehicles are. I really like this because it just sort of is like a real great way to think about school buses. And Jed Ruth from Thomas Built Buses reminded us that school buses don't have range anxiety, and they really match up well. So there's the cheery little yellow bus scooting along, and I think we're all happy to think about North Carolina kids riding along and not having to like wait till they're over 4 feet tall so they can breathe fresh air. That's a really scary thing that Ward let us in on. We heard from Richard Colley from Arrival. They've got some great technology that's coming to the US soon. And just the note about how important it is to think about the air quality and equity issues around moving away from heavy duty vehicles powered by diesel and to electric. Asaf from ABB, each of these has a great sort of photo of things in action, but just emphasizing that there's a menu of policy options. We need to look comprehensively. We need to think about in the way that we think about, there's many models out there of EVs. There's many models of EV policy, and how can we think through there? Don Fenton from Volvo Group really pushing towards making a bigger market. Let's make this pie bigger, and let's get other states into EVs. I think North Carolina is a great leader in that sense for the whole Southeast, if not the country at large. And so the more we can do in North Carolina, the more we can achieve this goal. Britta Formato from Duke, with some great examples of things that North Carolina can do, and some great inspiration, not captured here, but about how other countries, have moved down this path, and there's definitely a road that we can follow there. And Admiral Blair, just wonderful presentation, really driving home the national security argument, but a number of other arguments as well, and really reminding us that this is an issue of national security and something that we think can appeal to a lot of folks who would share that concern as well. Joel Espino, I think, gave us some great background and appreciation for why it is important to think about equity in transportation electrification, but then also giving us some tools, some ways that it can be done. Doesn't need to be hand-wringing. There's some great ways and some great ways to work with a broader community and bring in those benefits to everyone. And Shoshana closed us out with just a reminder of how at least the world is now, and maybe where it's moving to in the long term, showing us how reliant we are on truck transportation and freight. I think I have a box from Amazon coming every day to my door. My husband's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm not going to the store, which I try to consolidate so it's not too many boxes and too many trucks, but there is that growth there. It's just a portion of the market, but it definitely speaks to the opportunities to expand electrification beyond the light duty sector. So that was my 3 minutes. Some great highlights and kind of great memories from just earlier this morning. I'm just going to share with you some of the next steps. We've mentioned we have been recording the webinar. We'll be sharing both the slides and the webinar through an email back to all of you. We'll be posting that to our website. Give us a couple days. It takes some time, as you might imagine, to get all the rich content actually loaded and contained. We will also be sending you updates through a new North Carolina EV listserv that we'll create based on the participation here. Don't worry, we're not gonna spam you. It's just meant to be some periodic updates about what's going on, updates on the sales and installations in North Carolina, any other hot news, but look forward to keeping in touch with you through that. We appreciate the thoughts that will help inform our blueprint further. Really appreciate getting some of those insights about where can we go next, what's gonna be most fruitful, and really just looking forward to continuing to engage all of you in this conversation. So With that, I'll just say, let's keep going. We heard the governor talk about momentum. Let's seize on that. We hope that you've learned some things today and picked up a couple of ideas, maybe made a new friend that you can follow up with. We do want to keep in touch. We will send out a survey to get some feedback on both what you heard today, but then also maybe some of the ideas that you have going forward. We look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you all. And thank you to our fabulous speakers, moderators, and the whole EC team. Many folks behind the scenes, but really appreciate it and hope everyone is doing well. Thank you.